10 million is a very big number. It really is. And possibly bigger than you realised, the number of pensioners who are set to lose their winter fuel payment. I am generally in favour of universal benefits. Sadiq Khan explains it well when he justifies his decision to roll out free school meals to every primary school child in London. There's something nice about universal benefits. The idea that people who don't need something get something is easily turned into a negative, but it's actually a positive. It's a weird endorsement of equality, social equality, isn't it? And yet, if money is tight, then giving money from that pot to people who really don't need it becomes ever more questionable and arguably ever more wrong. So I think that I subscribe. If I have an opinion on this, it would be that it's probably right to means test the winter fuel payment, but I think the government have got this wrong. But I am very susceptible to the argument that they shouldn't really have taken it away from anybody. 10 million is a huge number. The weird bit of the story, I was just digging into this upstairs. About 2 million pensioners are poor. By the sort of objectively agreed measures for that. Many others are hard up, and the winter fuel payment would have made a huge difference to their household economics. The number I don't quite get is the 880,000 pensioners who are entitled to pension credit but don't get it, and therefore they're getting hit twice. Why wouldn't you apply for the pension credit if you were entitled to it? That's a genuine question. It's not the focus of the whole phone-in, but there is the idea that you don't realise you're entitled to it, which is, I suppose, possible, or you're too proud to claim it, which seems plausible but unlikely, or some other explanation that's blindingly obvious, but I haven't yet clocked it, which is probably the most likely explanation of all. But that means that either you hurry up and claim your pension credit and therefore reactivate your entitlement to the winter fuel payment, or you're already losing out on money that you were entitled to, and you're about to lose money that not only would you be entitled to, but you also probably need a lot more than everybody else who is about to lose it. So that's one of the things that ministers are doing. They are urging pensioners to check if they are eligible for pension credit. And if you are eligible for pension credit, then you will retain the £300 winter fuel payment. You need to get your application in, I think, by December the 21st in order to have it backdated for pension credit and to receive the fuel payment. Should we do that? Should we see how many of the 880,000 pensioners entitled to pension credit but not currently receiving it are listening to this programme? I can't really hand over the switchboard because I need callers to come on air and talk to me about some of the broader issues here. But, I mean, do you need to have internet access to do it? Would that perhaps be one of the reasons why people haven't signed up for the... I mean this, by the way. I know it's only just popped into my head as I'm speaking to you, but if something like this, radio station, can't help with something like that, then what are we doing here every day? In fact, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll ask Martin Flipping Lewis about this, the godfather of all things domestic finance. And Martin, I think, is going to be able to join us shortly after the next junction, which means I won't really be able to get around to taking your calls, I don't think, until about 10:30. Honestly, how will we survive? But what question am I going to be asking you to answer? Well, I wondered how long it would take for the claim that an unpleasant or an unwelcome or a difficult's a good word. How long would it take for the claim by a Labour politician that a difficult policy had to be introduced because of the scale of the mess that they had inherited? And I felt the first ticklings of that scepticism today. I didn't think it was going to happen quite this soon, and it may well be that I'm going early rather than them. But when Ed Miliband justifies the removal of, or when Rachel Reeves justifies the removal of pension credits, although it fell to Ed Miliband to do it this morning, the removal of help with your fuel bills for everybody not in receipt of a pension credit, because of the mess that they have inherited, the economic mess that they have inherited, there was a little bit of me that went, oh, really? Really? And I don't know. I mean, I'm going to look at the principles of this, the ethics of this, and also the reality of it. The question of whether we, who aren't affected by it, how we feel about the experiences, the situation of the people who are affected by it. But that's a little side order. Okay, let's park that now. How can we help pensioners who are entitled to it but don't realise get it? Okay, that's your starter for 10. But it is 9 minutes after 10. And the question I really want to ask, there's two questions really that I want to ask. The first is this the fairest way to do it? So the pension credit threshold, right, is means testing. You qualify for the pension credit according to what your income is. And if your income is below a certain level, you get the pension credit. And therefore, if you get the pension credit, then you get the winter fuel payment as well. But that means that if you're a pound below the threshold to get the pension credit, you're a pound above, I beg your pardon, the threshold to get the pension credit, you're going to lose your 300 quid fuel payment as well. Now, every pensioner in the country has lost money, lost help with their fuel bills because, amazingly, under Liz Truss, everybody got help with their fuel bills because the prices rocketed so much that the government actually had to step in and provide a form of universal credit to everybody. Everybody got a bit of help with their energy bills. So pensioners have already lost that. 10 million pensioners are now losing the £300 a year as well. 880,000 pensioners who should be getting the £300 and the pension credit are currently not lined up to receive that. And yet the question of whether this is the fairest way to do it is one that I cannot answer alone. I actually don't know. How many times have I said to you that thresholds are brutal policy mechanisms? Whether it's the benefit under which you get child benefit, anything that's means tested is potentially very, very brutal. You can live over the road from someone who earns £5 less than you do, and as a consequence of that, they receive a benefit worth much more than £5. But how else do you do it? I presume it would be too complicated to do it on a sliding scale. So is this fair? 0345 6060 973. How is it going to affect you? Paul Lewis, the financial journalist, estimates that about 2 million pensioners are poor, and we can't put a number on, and many, many more are not quite poor enough to get pension credit. They're the ones that I'm interested in today. Losing this 300 quid, is it actually, and I know particularly for your generation, talking about financial difficulty can be difficult, but I promise you a sympathetic ear. I would like to talk to you if losing this 300 quid is going to put you into a place where you won't be turning the heating on as much as you currently do. What kind of changes will you make according to the loss of that 300 quid? 0345 6060 973. We still reel, or I do, from the discovery live on air of warm banks a couple of years ago. I still, of all the moments that I've spent with you in the morning and felt the metaphorical shovel smack me in the back of the head as I sit here in the studio, getting my head around the existence of and necessity of warm banks was one of the maddest moments I think I've ever spent in the studio. I said, they what? They do what? And I should have seen it coming because I spoke to people during the sort of worst times of the cost of living crisis who were only turning on the radiator for an hour a day or sitting in a room under blankets watching television in balaclava helmets. I spoke to people who were physically cold all the time. You remember, I know you do, and you possibly think I refer to it too often, but I have no control over what lands heaviest in my mind. I remember the wife of the teacher in Great Yarmouth who had outdoor coats for her children because they were so cold that normally they wore coats inside, and when they went outside, they needed an extra layer. So they'd have an outdoor coat to go over the top of the indoor coat. Cold. In the United Kingdom in the 21st century, the fifth or sixth largest economy in the world. And people were too cold. They were too poor to heat their homes. Working people too poor to heat their homes. In the case of pensioners, perhaps. People who have worked all their lives ending up too poor to heat their homes. It's not right. It's not right. But is the Labour policy fair? Is it the only way, the best way, the fairest way to do it? 0345 6060 973. I get your calls on a bit earlier, actually. We'll talk to Martin after 11, and I want your calls to come on now, all right? So how is it going to affect you? Is it, for the rest of us, if you like, fair? We have to acknowledge some people are going to be right on the line, right on the threshold. That is the nature of a policy like this one, and tough, but that's the way it is. I don't know. I honestly don't know. You may well know more about this than I do. And here's the big question. So we were talking this morning about Labour losing members and Keir Starmer's approval ratings dropping a bit. And one of my colleagues said to me, do you think they'll be bothered by that? And I said, I don't think they're going to be bothered by anything in this field until about 2027, 2028. They've got a whopping great majority. It can barely be nibbled at by by-election results. There's highly, highly, highly unlikely prospects of anyone challenging Keir Starmer's leadership anytime soon. The right-wing media is currently struggling hugely to make anything land on them. Pay rises for public sector workers, they desperately try to sort of portray as unions holding the government to ransom. But, I'm all for pay rises for public sector workers. I'm all for pay rises for train drivers. The people who are at the forefront of austerity are the people who are going to need the most help now, or not even help. They're just a fair wage for a fair day's work. So on it goes. But the one thing that I think if I was Keir Starmer I'd be keeping a very close eye on is this: the winter fuel payment, the removal of financial support for old age pensioners. You can use the language, can't you? And I want your final answer to the question. The final question that I want you to answer today is how politically pungent do you think this policy is? So everyone can get involved. There's people directly affected by the change. There are people with informed opinions about the fairness of the change, the fundamental fairness stroke necessity of the change. And finally, the question of political pungency. How politically significant do you think this will be? Because when you pick the pocket of 10 million pensioners, you are taking an enormous political risk. And I want to know whether you think that this marks, because I am beginning to, does this mark the first big misstep of Keir Starmer's Labour government? All right, hit the numbers now. You will get through. 0345 6060 973. It's 10:16. 10:18 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It is a very deliberate policy change. So you can't have the two-child benefit cap as the first big mistake, because that involves an inherited policy that they are holding on to. This is very much a Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer decision. They're taking away fuel support payments for 10 million pensioners. And, well, you know what questions I'm asking you. How's it going to affect you? Is it the fairest way? If we accept the necessity of raising, say, £1.5 billion, saving £1.5 billion, is this the fairest way to do it with regards to pensioners? And then the final question, how politically pungent do we think it is? David says pungent, totally pungent, a mistake. The first action of a supposedly socialist government is to hit pensioners. No mention at all of a wealth tax so far, and I'm beginning to think there never will be. We've also got an early entrant for Idiot's Corner, but I shall save that for a moment and treat you to it shortly. Let's start with Heather, who's in Broxton. Heather, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi. Well, I actually work for Age Scotland, doing benefits training, so it's kind of my area.
Yes.
So obviously recently had to rework completely one of my presentations because of this.
Okay.
But we talk there about the stigma around old age pensioners claiming what they should, and that's part of the reason why we do the talks that we do, to try and encourage people.
So, I mean, this is a UK-wide figure, but 880,000 people entitled to a pension credit who are currently not claiming it. You would cite stigma as a very big factor in that statistic.
Yeah, often when you talk to a lot of older people, they have a lot of pride that they don't claim anything, they never have claimed anything, and obviously headlines in the Daily Mail, etc., about benefit scoundrels reinforce this idea that you shouldn't claim anything.
But so they don't feel that way about the old age pension, the statutory pension, which you spend your whole life knowing will kick in when you reach retirement age, but to actually plead poverty, if I were to use the language of stigma, to plead poverty is something that the older people are reluctant, many older people are reluctant to do.
It's not even poverty because attendance allowance isn't means tested at all. That's just disability based, and even claiming for that, people have difficulty overcoming that stigma for that.
So what are we going to do about it?
I really don't know.
Well, hang on, you're the expert. What do you do in your seminars?
It's so unfair because, like, if you have the full state pension and you reach pension age over 2016,
yes,
the full state pension is £221 a week, which is over the threshold for pension credit. So you can literally only be surviving on the state pension and still not receive winter fuel payment or any of the extras you get with pension credit.
So who gets it then?
It's
people who became pensioners before 2016.
£15 a week.
Say that again.
Less than £218.15 a week as your income.
And so who's in that category?
People who reach state pension age before 2016,
yes,
or people who don't have the full NI credit.
So they haven't got the stamps, as we used to call them.
Yeah.
How badly do you think this is going to affect the people affected, if you see what I mean?
It's going to be huge.
Is it really? Because it's a small number of pensioners that are, 1.4 are going to carry on getting it. 10 million are not going to get it. But the size of the constituency that are going to be meaningfully affected by it is quite small. But I guess the question I'm asking you is, how meaningful will it be?
It's such a lifeline, and obviously heating and health go hand in hand, and the older you are, the more vulnerable you are. So if you can't keep yourself warm, you can't keep yourself healthy. Like anticoagulants as well, a lot of older people are on that, and that makes you feel the cold so much more. I'm on that myself.
Are you?
Yeah.
So politically, how pungent do you think this is?
I think there's a lot of anger around about it, because there's so many people on that lip where they won't get it and really need it. I can understand why they've done it the way they have, because to implement a whole new means testing system would be really expensive and very negate any savings they made. So this is kind of pre-means tested for them. But it's just so harsh.
How does a pensioner listening to this, suddenly thinking maybe I'm entitled to it, how do they find out whether they are or not?
It's all income basis. They don't take your savings into account for the first 10,000, and then even after 10,000, they only make deductions, but you'd still be entitled.
But how do I apply? How do I know? How do I find out whether I'm entitled or not? Where do I go? What do I do?
There's a website and a phone line that you can call.
There is a phone line. We need to get that number, don't we? And see whether
apparently they're now asking a lot more people to fill in the paper form rather than doing it online.
Well, I might speak to someone.
The paper form is just factual information about it.
Well, we need to get hold of this. Can we get hold of the number or the paper form, or speak to somebody who's actually in the middle of it? Because if we can chip away at that 880,000 figure between now and 11 o'clock, then our time on air will not have been completely wasted. Heather, thank you. Leslie's in Glasgow, staying in Scotland. Leslie, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello, James.
Hello.
I've spoke to you before, and before I say what I'm going to say, I just want to say my wee mum will be listening on the other side of Glasgow. She listens every day. She loves you to bits.
Oh, what's her name?
Isabel.
Hello, Isabel, and thank you for listening. What do you want to say, Leslie?
I just want to say this to you. I hear so often people saying, it'll just be means tested, and anybody can, that can claim pension credit can get help. Now, the bar is so low, James, and what my wee mum doesn't realise, I'm her power of attorney and I look after her money, okay?
Yeah.
And what she doesn't realise is at the moment her outgoings for food, gas, all the things you have to pay to keep a house going, rent, because she rents still, she's actually in a minus every month. She's £100 short, right?
Yeah.
So the thing is, James, she is losing this money, and she's already in, if you know what I mean, running at a loss.
In the red.
And when my dad died, he left this tiny wee pension, and it's £200 odd a month. You break that down, it's a month, so you break that down into what she's getting extra a week. So it's a few pounds a week extra.
On top of the state pension?
Yeah, she's getting a state pension.
So that means she doesn't get pension credit?
Yes, so she's a few So what I was going to say is she doesn't get pension credit. She qualifies for no help with anything, nothing with her rent. She's living on her own.
And now she loses this. And now she loses this payment.
So instead of being a couple of £100 and that she can't fund every month, she's going to be this £300 short on top of that. How are people going to survive? And the last thing I wanted to say to you, James, is already when I go over to see her now, it's been really cold in Scotland. We really haven't had a summer.
Surely not. Scotland.
And I know. You know, we're bloody freezing up here, pardon my swear, but it's freezing. So, but what I was wanting to say to you was I've already been over the other day and the house was frozen. And I said, why have you not got your heating on? And she said to me, Leslie, she says, they're taking my £300 away and to keep me warm in the winter. I'll need to save everything I can just now. So she's sitting with a wee thing that she plugs in, wraps round her, chittering at night in the summer. What's my wee mum going to be like in the winter? And that's the reality. It's okay to say people can fund it or people that have got...
Or that it's not going to affect that many people that badly. If it's your mum, it matters, doesn't it?
Yeah, but the thing is, it will affect. I know thousands of people. All my wee neighbours round here and all my mum's wee neighbours, they're all in the same boat. They're in rented houses with no savings. And they don't qualify for pension credits, so they don't get any other benefits.
So it's the people who are just above the threshold, isn't it, that are going to be hit hardest? And you've done that. You've done the checking. You know that she's not entitled to it. You phoned.
I sat online the other day because my mum doesn't have internet access either, James. No. So I did it online, and I went on and I tried to get her pension credit. Everything I've tried to apply for her, she is literally just over the threshold.
Like pennies over the threshold.
Pennies over the threshold, but she's out. She's already can't afford to fund herself. And, you know, because, well, you know yourself, food, everything's went up. Yeah. So even shopping for her now is nearly double what it was. But her funds haven't. And all our wee neighbours and folk round about it, and lots of people where I live as well, they pay their rent or they pay their mortgage or whatever, and that's all they've got. They don't have savings. They don't have any other income.
No, I know. You've nailed it. You've absolutely crystallised the constituency that's going to be hit hardest by this. And
they're going to die. And you know the thing is, they're going to be taken into the NHS ill, hypothermia, lack of nutrition. And that's just going to add to the burden that's already the way the country is.
It's
so
a great
it's a crazy scheme.
It puts a slightly different complexion on the question of whether or not this is the only... I mean, it's going to hurt some people, but the question of whether or not this is the only way to do it, this is, if you accept the necessity of saving money, then this is the only way to do it, is a question I feel uncomfortable asking now, having heard about Isabel's plight. Final question for you, Leslie, is how politically pungent do you think it is? Because if I were to be really cynical, I can't really see this pushing traditional Labour supporters into the arms of the Tory party. I can see it pushing them into apathy or not bothering to vote or feeling very let down by the Labour Party. But this, in terms of political impact, how big a mistake do you think Keir Starmer is making?
Well, what I'll say to you is, I'll say it as quickly as I possibly can. My dad was a strong Labour man. I was brought up in a Labour, and life was good when I was growing up. I'm 56, and life was good when the Labour were in the last time, and everything. The country ran really well. So actually, up in Scotland, I've been an SNP voter on and off, but this time I went back to Labour because that's where my roots are. I remember growing up, life was good with Labour. And as I say, I was brought up that way. And you know, when Labour get back in, I was so overjoyed. I thought maybe they'll turn the country around. They're going to have one hell of a mess to clean up because nobody's really been in charge of anything for 14 years properly. And I thought maybe they'll do it and they'll do it right. And I still get faith that they can turn it around, James, but this is a bad move. This is not a good move, and I don't know what they're thinking about doing this because it'll turn an awful lot of people, not against them, but be very, very wary of them. And they certainly won't turn them to the Tories because you'd need to have a foolish.
That's why I worry about the cynicism behind some of the calculations here, Leslie. But you've made a brilliant case, and if it is going to be politically pungent for the Labour Party, for the Labour Party supporters listening to this programme, you've just made it more pungent than it was before with your beautiful, a brilliant explanation of exactly how this is going to affect people like your mum. the lovely Isabel. 10:30 is the time. Thomas Watts has your headlines. 33 minutes after 10 is the time. The number you need, and I mean, if you think you might be eligible, if you only get the state pension and you retired before 2016, then you probably are. If I've understood things correctly, and I apologise if I haven't, then the number you need is 0800 731 0160. Do you say O or 0? What do you say? I've always said O, but it sounded wrong. It sounded wrong at the end then. I can't say 0160. That'd just be weird. So it's 0800 731 0160. Don't start quibbling about whether you say O or 0. You're trying to help people. Final time, 0800 731 0160. I don't know how big their switchboard is. If we plug a website for something like Craft Gin in Scotland, then when we do that, we crash it. We've crashed some fairly big websites actually, because suddenly everyone who's got their phone in their hand goes, "Oh, I'll have a little look at that." So you may just want to jot that number down and try it later. I would love to hear from you either today or on Tuesday. I'm taking the bank holiday off. I'd love to hear from you at some point if you have done this as a consequence of listening today and discovered that you are entitled to the payment. If we can chip away at that 880,000 figure, although we are but a tiny minnow in the ocean of the country's population. And the website, you just go to gov.uk if you are online. It will lead you through. The full thing you want is winter-fuel-payment. So it would be gov.uk/winter-fuel-payment. And then it will give you the various buttons that you need to push and boxes that you need to tick to find out whether you are entitled to it. 10:35 is the time. 3 questions. The third one, in many ways, the longest term. So how's it going to affect you? I think Leslie's done a brilliant job of telling us exactly what it's going to be like to be on the front line of this policy. Is it nonetheless, desperate examples notwithstanding, is it nonetheless the right / a fair thing to do? And number 3, if it isn't, how politically pungent will it prove to be? Who wants to come on and be really enthusiastic about it? The problem with cuts is that they are a great idea until it's you being cut. It's a bit like policing. It's like the opposite of policing, isn't it? I'm a big fan of policing until I'm the one being policed. But this is it's the same with tax. I'd be happy to pay a little bit more tax. Really, how much more? 50p. And I'd want to have a full say over where every single penny of those 50p's goes. So, the difference between principle and practice is crucial on a day like this. But if you want to have a crack, and don't do it in a performative way, if you want to sincerely explain why you welcome this policy, I'll put you on there more or less straight away. 0345 6060973, because we may need that balance. We may need that sort of reminder of the plight of the most severely affected, notwithstanding the size of the national debt. The depth of the hole that the government finds itself in is such that we have to start shoveling back into the hole as soon as possible, or at least stop digging it deeper. Penny's in Aylesbury. Penny, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello,
well,
Penny.
I'm not going to say I'm for the policy.
That's quite all right,
I was
Penny.
widowed 11 years ago. I then had to wait for my pension, which I should have got when I was 60. I've tried to work. I'm now 70. I'm still trying to work, but I knew if I couldn't work, then I'm in trouble because I'm renting.
Right.
So I did the online form for pension credit, bearing in mind if I had to stop working because I was ill and I'm diabetic, I wouldn't be entitled to it. And I think the government really need to listen to the fact that it has a knock-on on the economy. I have to keep warm. If you don't give people basic food and warmth, they are going to be really ill, which costs the economy even more.
This is a point that has been made repeatedly, is that so we can talk in sort of theoretical and somewhat glib terms about the people most affected, can't we? But actually, that overlooks the knock-on effect of being most affected, and it is going to put a drain on the health services and the emergency services. Were you eligible for it when you did the form, when you filled it in?
If I wasn't working,
theoretically,
I still wouldn't be either.
No, but
that is always a worry if you're a widow. And you think something goes wrong, you think, well, I'm not going to be able to afford to heat my house or whatever. And the government really need to listen, because I've got friends that are going into hospital because of this.
Already?
And it's costing a fortune.
They're already going into hospital?
Well, not in the summer, obviously, but I've in the terms.
Thank you for not calling me an idiot there, and using the actual words, just relying entirely on your tone of voice to call me an idiot, Penny.
No, I'm not. What I'm saying is,
yes.
Even last winter, pensioners didn't have enough, if you see what I mean.
So even when they were getting the credit, and the cap was lower, they were getting ill as a consequence of coldness.
Why have we got food banks and things? We really shouldn't have them, should we?
We've got warm banks. And listen,
warm banks,
Rome wasn't built in a day. There's no earthly way that Labour could have waved a magic wand and fixed all of the situations you describe.
I appreciate that, but
to have gone further, to have made things worse for people rather than leaving them the same seems like a very big miscalculation.
Yeah, well, they've not roamed down, haven't they, really?
How would you do it, though? Because you've got 10 million people affected by this. If we could wave a magic wand and get the 880,000 who are entitled to it but don't currently claim it, if we could fix that so they get it as well, you've then got several 100,000 people, possibly as many as 1 million in the category that you describe.
Yeah.
And yet Rachel Reeves would say we're saving £1.5 billion. So how would you take it away from the people who really, really, really don't need it, and from the people who really, really don't need it, and from the people who really don't need it, and from the people who don't need it, and from the people who just don't need it, and from the people who don't really need it, and not take it away from the people who need it? How would you do that?
Well, what we don't do with any government is look at the long term and look at all the things that link into this that may end up helping people like that. I do agree that people who don't need it shouldn't get it.
So how do we do that, though?
I don't know in terms of a system, but somebody needs to start doing that.
But wherever you put the line, there are going to be people who are 2p above it, aren't there?
Yeah, but you've also got to think about they haven't sorted out social care and links to health. And
no, there's all sorts of stuff going on. I mean, I appreciate that. But I guess the simplistic nature, in some senses, of our conversation ignores ramifications, repercussions, knock-on effects. I mean, inevitably, necessarily. But, yeah, I mean, I think you're pretty close to using the word holistic there, Penny. There is a need for a holistic approach to the care of our elderly people, and this certainly isn't going to end up being part of it. Alison speaks to what I was alluding to a moment ago. My dad's comfortably off. He's not affluent, but he's okay with losing his winter fuel payment because he says he doesn't need it. So if it helps others, he's fine with it. And I agree with Jackie on this. You have to be careful. You don't want to sound like you're patronising people for having regional or national accents, but I was charmed by Leslie's accent as well. She said the way she kept referring to my wee mum. I'm torn on the heating allowance thing, though. Certainly there are many, many people who don't need it. My dad was one. He gave his to charity. But for many others, it's literally a lifesaver. And how big an impact is it going to have on Keir Starmer's standing? I wonder. Chris is in Sheffield. Chris, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, Chris.
First-time caller.
Welcome. You've waited a while. How old are you?
I'm 80.
I knew that because you told Roxy, so I was setting myself up for that. Yeah. Well, 80 years and you finally got on the show. Carry on, Chris.
Well, I mean, that last lot took me free television licence off me, didn't they?
Yeah, that's true.
As well.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't need this heating allowance, but I want everybody else to have it. I'm not against it.
Yes.
But the thing is, James, there's no help on claiming any of these kind of benefits. You've just given a number out. How long do you think you're going to have to wait before you get through when you ring that number?
Well, you'd have to try to tell me, wouldn't you? But I appreciate you're probably going to be... And it's a free number. It's an 0800 number. Yeah. So, but all right, it will be a bit of a palaver.
I've just had some need to claim a benefit for my daughter who has learning disabilities.
Okay.
The new personal independent payment.
Yes.
And I've had to wait nearly 3 weeks to get an appointment at the Citizens Advice Bureau, which takes me past the date that the PIPS people want the phone back. So then I have to go on phone to them and wait nearly an hour to get through to get the date put back. We need a system where when people retire, they should be able to go somewhere with all the paperwork and sit down and say, right, this is my income, what am I entitled to?
What do I do? And you just need someone to talk you through the form for your daughter's PIP, do you?
Well,
to sort of go through it with you.
Well, The trouble is, James, my daughter has a learning disability. Yeah. These forms are aimed at people who are in wheelchairs and can't walk, and
yes,
it's a nonsense.
Yeah, it is. And I don't know what to say to you. There must be. Is there? No, there's nowhere. No one can help you. There maybe back in the day, someone in the doctor's surgery would have had a spare 10 minutes to go through it with you, but that's going to be another 3-week wait, isn't it? And you're not going to get through
and doctors charge for filling forms in, you know.
I do know that. It drives my mum potty, that one. Yeah. She's from Sheffield as well, Chris, as it goes, and she's a similar age to you, but the changes, none of them seem positive, do they? None of the things that they tell us are improvements sometimes end up feeling like improvements.
I think, you know, last time we did one of these forms, James, we went to somewhere in the city and sat down for an hour and a half with a man and we filled it in. But you can't do that now because they're all working from home.
Is that how you think that's...
I'm sure that's what's happening.
So who were they working for?
They were working for Citizens Advice Bureau.
Right.
But they didn't one in Sheffield now. It's all done on the phone.
I see what you mean. Well, listen, don't turn off...
You're doing a good job by giving that phone number out, but it's not easy.
No, it's not. And if anyone listening comes up with or has anything that might be helpful to you in your very specific situation, Chris, I will either share it on air or I'll get one of the team to give you a buzz in the next 20 minutes or so to help you out with that. Don't get your hopes up, but sometimes people listening go, I know what Chris can do, and that's kind of your point, isn't it? Is that it's quite hard to find out what you can do. But I love your idea about having a sort of a space where you can go when you reach your retirement age, and they talk you through absolutely everything that is yours, effectively, your entitlements and the things you need to change and sign up for. It's so straightforward, Chris. It's so straightforward and such a good idea. It'd almost certainly never happen. 10:45 is the time. Some people are so rude. It's so unnecessary, Lee, to have a go at me for not fact-checking Chris while he was talking on air about Citizens Advice Centres and me not having the facts at my fingertips about how many there are actually in Sheffield. But looking at where the confusion might kick in, I think that the sort of face-to-face meetings take place at community access points, they're called now. So you can find them. There's one in Firth Park Library, Jordanthorpe Library, Howden House in the city centre. But otherwise, you go down another route on the website and you're told that there's no face-to-face option because this is head office. So I think there are places where you can sit down with people. You can drop in still. And you can ring up and find out whether you need to make an appointment. So I don't know whether that will be helpful, but I'm certainly not going to take any jip from you, Lee, in Frankfurt, over not having these facts at my fingertips while I'm speaking live to somebody trustworthy and decent on the radio. And speaking of Chris and his mention of his daughter's educational needs, I don't know if you saw something really remarkable at the Democrat convention in America. And it was Tim Walz's son, Gus, who's 17 years old and has a number of conditions, none of them debilitating, but all of them filed under special needs. ADHD has a non-verbal learning difficulty, which isn't the same as non-vocal. That doesn't mean he can't speak, but it's a learning difficulty nonetheless. And I think he might be autistic. And something really odd happened. You know, when we were talking yesterday about the divide, really, just between what I would call decency, but even decency can be a divisive word. I'll tell you what you can do. Have a look at the clip that went up yesterday of me reading, just reading a tweet from somebody who was furious that we were being so sympathetic and compassionate towards young people with anxiety or with mental health issues that had affected their education or with special educational needs. And David, his name was, and tried to point out to David that the more care and concern you show for young people, the less likely they are to grow up bitter and, I don't want to say twisted, but bitter and angry and unfulfilled and short-tempered and all of the things that make life for them and for everybody around them much harder. It's one of those moments where I've held up a mirror on the radio. And if you go and look at that clip and look at some of the replies from people that are currently paying Elon Musk to be prominent, to have a blue tick and be prominent, you'll see when you hold up that mirror and people look in it, it's that they are absolutely horrified by what they see, and inevitably they smash the mirror and they try and attack the person holding it up. But it's a crucial element of our current problems, the current problems that we face as a society and America face, all societies. And I don't think I've ever seen it better encapsulated than when this lad Gus Walls, 17 years old, with an array of learning difficulties, just got completely overcome by love for his father. It was a moment of unutterable beauty. You know, raw emotion, pure emotion is so rare, and often it's only negative. You know, when you see people screaming at the opposing team or when you're watching the football on the telly, you very rarely you see it at a Taylor Swift concert, I suppose, but it doesn't have quite the emotional heft of seeing a 17-year-old boy watching his dad on stage, a father aiming to become the next vice president of the United States of America, articulating his love for his family and how much his family mean to him. And this lad he overflows with love and joy, jumps to his feet, and he just, I mean, if you have been lucky enough in your life to have a dad that you love or loved the bones of, I defy you to watch that without tearing up. Or if you are lucky enough to have made a half-decent job of being a parent and you know that you have managed somehow to earn the love and the devotion of your child, you watch that and tell me that you're not moved by it. It's incredible. And at one point, he does this thing which a Hollywood scriptwriter would have thanked his guardian angel for coming up with, where he just hits his chest, he points at the stage, and he goes, "That's my dad." And his face is emotional, he's tearful, he's crying, "That's my dad." Like that. And I tell you what, every day I think it's time to come off Twitter now. It's just become so unbearable. And then you remember the stuff that you probably wouldn't come across quite as easily or quite as quickly if you came off the hell site. I mention it for two reasons. Number one, it will brighten your day. Number two, unless it won't, because almost immediately Donald Trump fans and people like David, who rang in yesterday or texted in yesterday, they don't tend to ring anymore, to complain about kindness, wokeness, whatever you want to call it, and all of the blue tick accounts replying to the tweet by saying, he's angry, he's the one that's angry, he's the one that's full of hate and bitterness. They watch that, and I don't know what it is they feel, whether it's sadness at knowing they never felt like that about their dads, or whether it's heartbreak or humiliation of knowing that their dads never felt like that about them. But and I know that the right way to respond to it is not to make them feel worse. It's to try to make them feel better, even though we'll get that wrong and we'll try and do it in a clumsy way, and they'll end up taking their hate or spitting all that internalized self-loathing out and spitting it in the direction of the people who are trying to undo some of the self-loathing. But I sometimes think we over-analyse the political divides at the moment, when so often, and moments like that, little Gus Walls' contribution to the convention where his father is accepting the nomination to run with Kamala Harris for the White House, that those moments actually provide us with the best descriptions of where the divides lie. It lies between people who love and people who hate, you know? I really do think that. And that's why people like Andrew Tate have been so popular over the years, because they appeal to hate. And it's sometimes a more seductive appeal than the appeal to love. I used to say that the queue for the ghost train is always 100 times longer than the queue for the speak your weight machine. But we need to improve that. So it's not just the speak your weight machine. It's the wrap your arms around you and give you a cuddle machine. The queue for that, oddly, would be longer than the queue for the ghost train. But we haven't quite worked it out yet. But do watch that clip. And yeah, I know I'm feeling a bit short today, with people having a go at me for things that are obviously true. I can't check the Sheffield Citizens Advice Bureau system while I'm talking, and I know that you can also see clips like that on other platforms. I'm just talking about where I saw it, honestly. Please. So I know you don't need to be on Twitter to see that clip. I'm just pointing out that that's where I saw it, and a lot of you watching it now to share my prediction or confirm my prediction that you wouldn't be able to watch it without tearing up a bit. 10:55 is the time. Derek is in Leeds. Yeah, it's odd that. My mum's from Sheffield, my dad's from Leeds. Got them both covered today. Derek, what would you like to say?
Well, just before I say it,
yes.
Can I just say, Gus Waltz, my God, I watched it live, and I don't mind saying I'm 71, and I cried like a baby. It was fantastic.
Me
you
too.
did right.
Wasn't it special?
Sorry for wasting your time a bit with that.
It was, thank you.
No, it was iconic. Right, on this, I think it's fairly straightforward what we're talking about.
A Yorkshireman who thinks it's fairly straightforward. Whatever next, Derek?
Aye, it's not complex. It's only complex down south.
Go on. Go on.
First of all, you can't have a benefit that is seeking to help people in financial difficulty with a one-off payment. You don't get universal benefit once a year. You get it every month because you need it.
Yes.
Now, my point is, this is a ridiculous scheme. It gives far more money to people who don't need it, like me.
Yes. In
my humble opinion, as a lifelong Labour boy, it seems to me more to do with bribing pensioners, the rich pensioners, to vote Tory and nothing else. They certainly don't need the money. So I would abolish that scheme totally.
Yes.
Then what I'd do is what all your callers are basically asking for. Please make the benefit net for pensioners, which I describe as the pension credit scheme that we've got, fit for purpose. Yes. It's obviously not catching the right people, and it's obviously not making available the right amount of money. So we get rid of one DAP scheme, once there are forms not to fill in, and then we use some of the money, if not all of it, to put a financial envelope around people in genuine need. And I think that's I can't
argue.
The local authority, so I get on my high horse about it.
No, it's not your high horse. It's a clear and comprehensible analysis. What I would be interested in, and this is going to be more opinion than analysis. Why do you think there are 880,000 people it proves your point about fitness for purpose. But why 880,000 people who are entitled to it but don't currently claim it?
Yeah. Well, there are, with these things, there's always a number of drivers to the situation. The obvious one is the old-fashioned, in some ways very laudable attitude pensioners have, that they don't want to be a burden, they don't want to claim for money and all, and that is definitely a driver. But the bigger driver is access to the system.
Yeah, I think you're
as
right.
You've heard people say. It's like a proposition from bloody Liechtenstein to try and get these benefits. And I remember when I worked in local government, it was a 40-page form to try and get housing benefits.
Yeah. It's not accidental, is it?
The systems are designed.
No, I think you're right. Making it harder and harder, therefore fewer people end up with it. You're right. We can't break it down into neat, self-contained categories, but there'll be several different factors in play. The people that, and I'm sure like you, Derek, you'd be the same, the people I worry about the most are the ones who are actually going to be, in a sense, cutting their nose off to spite their face through pride and principle, and sadly through decades of right-wing media suggesting that anybody getting welfare from the welfare state is some sort of scrounger or some sort of lead swinger. So the people who will be going colder than they need to be going this winter because they won't sign up for benefits to which they are entitled to, because the attempts to demonise the word benefits have, as we often talk about on this programme, been so completely successful. Thank you, Derek. I must tell you something funny that he reminded me of then with his comments about down south. Somebody sent me a thing yesterday, and it was a genuine thing, I think from the 40s, a map that was published by Shell and BP. And it was how to drive from the north to the south coast. Or basically, the map was called How to Avoid London. And I'm very conscious, presenting my programme in the middle of Leicester Square, that sentiment has not entirely gone away. 3 minutes after 11 is the time. I tried to work something out yesterday. I tried to work out why the viciousness of the violence directed at our police officers during the Farage riots was taking me by surprise. Why I hadn't clocked it sooner. Looking at the detail of some of the people being sentenced, looking at footage even, particularly of one fella trying to smash a police van window with a piece of masonry as a police officer was inside, looking at the viciousness on the faces of these people as they approached police lines and with rocks and planks of wood and attempted to attack the police. And the answer's really obvious. Why didn't I clock this properly at the time? Do you know what the answer is? It's because obviously our attention was directed more towards the attempts to set fire to mosques and hotels containing asylum seekers. So the police line, if you like, was secondary to what I then took to be the proper target of the violence of these disgusting people, in many cases responding to hideous online claims that turned out to be totally false. Nigel Farage, of course, relying upon the social media account of a man who was arrested again yesterday, and the latest allegations that Andrew Tate face include, I don't even want to tell you, to be honest, because it's so unpleasant, but all of the things that they claim to care about when Muslims are supposedly responsible, Andrew Tate is now facing trial for. All of them. All of them, and his brother. In fact, as we pointed out yesterday, you could comfortably describe them as working-age migrants accused of rape and people trafficking and sundry other crimes. So inevitably, or inarguably, many of the people encouraged to go out on the streets and channel their rage, their incoherent rage, about these falsehoods at asylum seekers or Muslims or the police bit. That only really started landing with me when I was looking at the cases. There's a dad of two, and does that hit you? Does that affect you when you read that they're fathers? It affects me. I think, oh, that's poor kid. What chance do the children have? The dad of two was caught in footage shown to the court as he joined in on attacks against police officers, 3 times throwing stones or a plank at them and referring to them as black and then C words. Described as a family man, one of them, with an exemplary army record. There's a poignancy to that as well. As the Daily Mirror describes it, a night of disorder triggered by the fake news, and the idea that the people who spread the fake news are not responsible for the violence is absolutely ridiculous. A car set on fire, multiple officers injured. This is Joel Bishop, a qualified tank driver who served with the Royal Logistic Corps, sentenced to 18 months in prison. And I mean, as you will know now, there are more and more cases describing in some detail and showing in some cases the footage of the violence, the viciousness, the hatred being directed at the police. And it's specifically the police about whom we will be talking today. Let me clear a couple of things up for you first, if that's necessary. The reason why these cases are progressing through the courts very quickly is that the culprits have indicated that they will plead guilty, which does away with the need for trial preparation. So other cases where the accused have not indicated that they will plead guilty will take a lot longer to reach court. I don't want to sound patronising or condescending on this, because the effort put into confusing people is absolutely huge, and it's largely done by exactly the same people who spread the misinformation that was one of the main reasons why these vicious riots happened. So the same people that spread claims about the suspect in the Southport killings being a Muslim or an asylum seeker or somebody from overseas, or whatever the lie was, the people responsible for disseminating those lies have now effortlessly moved on to claiming that there's some sort of imbalance in the way that various trials are progressed, whereas the opposite is true. If you indicate that you are going to plead guilty, you will go to court and be sentenced much more quickly than you will be if you don't. It really is that simple. In fact, there's an example in the Daily Mail that is almost unbelievably disingenuous about how easy it is to manipulate people with dishonest or disingenuous reporting and or headlines. And I may get onto that a little later in the programme, but I really want to go in on this first, because I don't quite get it. I don't quite get it. I can understand how the race rioters managed to believe that attacking a mosque or attacking a hotel containing asylum seekers would somehow advance their warped cause. But why would they attack our police officers? What has happened to them or to all of us that has painted a target on the back of the people who, well, let's just say that there were a terrible crime unfolding on your patch today, a dangerous crime, the people who would run towards the horror while the rest of us ran away, the people who would run towards the terrorist, the people who would run towards the attacker, the knife man, the people who would run towards the trouble while the rest of us would run away, and they would be urging us to run away. What is in your view, how did the police end up being so viciously and so violently targeted during the riots? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. So what is the explanation? What's your explanation for why? And it may be that I'm being a bit naive. Naive's not quite the right word. A bit aloof, perhaps. And I'm thinking there must be a reason, and there isn't. You're just a vicious thug. You're out for a riot, and you'll attack anything that comes near you. But the targets seem to me to be more specific than that. You know that they attacked hotels containing asylum seekers. You know that they attacked a mosque, and you know why. Why would they attack the police? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need on that. The other element of this conversation that I'm very interested in is the question of what it's like for the police. Now, I don't know whether or not police officers themselves are even allowed to talk to me about how events affect your relationship with the job. I hope you are. You don't obviously have to use your real name. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. But I do want to know. I want to ask. I mean, what is it that the events that we saw? What effect do they have on your relationship with the job? You police by consent. Most of us. And hey, I'm not going to take any lectures today on how different the relationship with the police is when you're white. I know that. I speak from a position of enormous privilege. But as a central rule, as an essential rule, the police run towards the trouble, whoever is committing it and whoever the victims are. And there will be imbalances in what happens afterwards. And we know that there are imbalances. Institutional racism creates imbalances, but you'll allow me this general rule for the purposes of today's conversation, and the general rule is these people run towards the trouble. They run towards the threat. And yet, during these riots, they had targets painted on their back somehow, and I want to know how, okay? And I really want to know how you process it as a police officer. Now, police officers are limited in what they can and can't say to a radio phone-in programme like this. And I forgot to ask Neil Basu, former Assistant Commissioner of the Met, Head of Counter-Terrorism, who's my guest this week on Full Disclosure. We'll hopefully play you a little clip of that later in the programme. A really interesting and inspiring man, a deeply impressive man. And I forgot to ask him this question because my mind hadn't moved yet away from the horror of seeing the mosques and the hotels containing asylum seekers coming under attack, to the horror at seeing police officers being terrorised by the people they would protect. Every single person that threw a brick at a police officer, if they got attacked tomorrow in their own home or in their street, then obviously shortages and operational problems notwithstanding, those would be the police officers that turned up to help them. Incredible to think that, really. And they were coming under vicious and sustained attack. And I want you to tell me what it's like to see that happen if you are a police officer or, and this may be a little bit more fruitful, or if you are someone who loves a police officer. You're the partner of a police officer, the parent of a police officer, the child of a police officer? What does it do to your relationship with their job to see hundreds of people? I don't know how helpful it is to use pejorative adjectives, but welcome to insert your own at this point. What's it like to see your loved ones come under attack from precisely the people that they are prepared every single day to risk their lives to protect? That's the way to describe it, isn't it? What's it like to see your loved ones come under that sort of attack, that sort of vicious and potentially fatal attack from people who you know they are prepared to risk their life every day to protect? Does it change anything, or is it just business as usual? Is it par for the course, or is there something about these particular scenes, these particular crimes, that does actually nudge your needle? I must be a tough business, knowing when they leave the house every day that you know they could find themselves in the middle of a tragedy. 03456060973 is the number that you need. So why did it happen? Why would the police be targeted in this way? It's this way. And what does it do to your relationship with your job or your relationship with your loved one's job? 03456060973 is the number that you call. You may be right, Yarrick. It may just be, I did allude to this briefly, that the type of people who turned up were just looking for fun, in quotes. The protest was just an excuse for a free-for-all for violence. But it wasn't. I disagree with you. They're chanting about Allah, they're chanting about children, they're chanting all sorts of things that somehow they'd ended up thinking the police were responsible for. I want to know how you think that happened and what it does to your job. I'm not going to put you in idiot's corner, Darren. And I am, for legal reasons, going to have to slightly edit the text that you've sent because it's a live case. But I spent 2 or 3 minutes at the beginning of this explaining the difference between somebody accused of a crime indicating to the authorities that they are going to plead guilty and somebody who isn't. But I also said that the effort put into confusing people is epic. And it is the same people that spread lies about the Southport killings who are now spreading lies about the criminal justice system. So I'm not putting you in idiot's corner, Darren, and in many ways I'm grateful that you got in touch with this. So Darren writes, I don't agree with violence. Rioters should be jailed, but why the hell have the, and then he uses the phrase, scumbags at the airport, and I'm going to insert an allegedly, who allegedly broke a woman police officer's nose, not been jailed yet. That's why people are angry. And I'm going to talk to you directly now, Darren, because you are precisely the person I was trying to address 10 minutes ago. And I obviously failed. I've obviously failed to get this through to you, and that might be my fault. Or at least the fault of all the people trying to make you feel the anger that you're feeling and the anger that you describe. But it's not your fault. It's not your fault because they're trying so hard to do it. So I will try harder. If somebody accused of a crime, up to and including violence or indeed assaulting police officers, indicates to the authorities that they are going to plead guilty, therefore there needs to be no trial, therefore solicitors and barristers do not need to prepare cases for the prosecution and cases for the defence, then the case can progress incredibly quickly and the sentence can be handed down more or less immediately. If the case is more complicated, or if the accused does not indicate that they will plead guilty upon their first appearance in court, then the process becomes much more complicated and much longer. So anybody accused of anything who doesn't indicate an early guilty plea immediately triggers a process by which the Crown Prosecution Service will prepare a case for the prosecution and the defendant's lawyers will prepare a case for the defence, and those wheels turn incredibly slowly. In fact, the state of the criminal justice system after 14 years of austerity is such that they are currently turning more slowly than ever before. But the crucial difference between what the people pouring poison into your ear are telling you and what the simple reality and truth is that if you are not going to plead guilty upon your first appearance in court, the road to justice is long. And if you are going to plead guilty, it's incredibly short. So that's why this happens, and that's why you shouldn't be angry with anyone except the people still lying to you and trying to make you angry. All right? So that's just for you, Darren, and anybody else who's still falling for the lies being spread by the same people that lied to you about the Southport killings. There should have been a clue there. I remember that one of the most prominent, Nigel Farage, later revealed that he was getting his information from the social media account of a man wanted in this country and currently facing trial in Romania for all manner of hideous crimes against women, and it emerged yesterday, quite possibly children as well. 19 minutes after 11. Back to the central question. Who painted the targets on the back of the police? 0345 6060 973. And how does it affect the police and their families to see this sort of violence unfolding in real time, in front of them, on their television screens? It's 11:19. It is 21 minutes after 11. I mean, maybe I'm naive. I find it absolutely chilling when I see police coming under attack in that kind of way, wherever it is, whatever the protest is, but I've never seen it that vicious. I've never watched footage on my television screen of police being attacked in such a widespread, nationally widespread and vicious stroke violent way. So what happened? Why did it happen? And what does it do to them, to the people under attack, to the police officers and their loved ones? Maria's in Gillingham. Maria, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. Long-time LBC listener, first-time caller, so I am a bit nervous.
It's only me.
Of course. I'm a police officer with over 25 years in the force. I just want to say that the reason that police have been targeted, the reason we've got a target on our back, I feel it's multifaceted. I feel it's 14 years, as we're talking about, of austerity, massive cuts to our numbers. Obviously, our service isn't what we want it to be. And that fuels hatred again through the media, who are quite happy to put the spotlight on things we're failing at because we just haven't got the resources. We are the punch bag for society, and I find it really depressing that we are a continual target. When something dreadful happens in central London, like a bomb goes off, we are everybody's heroes for 24 hours, and then it's forgotten, and we are back to, fortunately we don't have scenes like we've seen recently all the time, but
you see that as part of the same process. You don't see that as an aberration or an extraordinary moment. You see it as an evolution of broader narratives.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Absolutely.
But I'm not a copper. I saw that as a sort of an eruption of something new. There's so much that doesn't get reported of things that we do incredibly well. Of course.
Because good news just does not sell. So bad news is always easier to spread. And there's always disorder going on, particularly in London. And that doesn't get reported. But that's what we're dealing with. And those poor police officers, I wasn't on the front line on this occasion for these riots. But these people are my colleagues, and I know they have families at home who are watching this on the television and watching their dad or their mum or their brother, sister, daughter, son, and thinking, oh, my God, are they even going to come home? And for what?
Is that what, I mean, it's a silly question. Of course that's what people feel. Here's a line. A father of three who left a police officer fearing for their life as he tried to smash a van window has been jailed for 3 years. The judge described it as bad a case as I have seen so far.
Yeah. And for what? What have we actually achieved apart from looting a vape shop, setting a shoe shop on fire, and now decreasing those police numbers? Because what these people, not the rest of the population, and there's more of the good than there are of the bad, but these people, these police officers are now off sick. Most of them, a lot of them, they're off sick either with a bit of stress, an injury. Now, who is going to answer the calls that come in every day? Because frontline policing will be affected by this. And when these people then ring 999 and we don't have the resources to send, well, that's going to be our fault again. It's exhausting, James.
When did it change? Because you mentioned the length of service that you've done. Maybe it's felt like this from the start, but there's a growing sense now that large sections of the public have been successfully encouraged to look upon the police as their enemy.
Yeah. Well, I think just we've just been ground down over the last 14 years, because isn't it better to point the finger at us and where there are cuts and people are struggling and society is, failing because we haven't got things in place to look after people. I don't know, like after school clubs for kids all closing down, libraries closing down, sports centres closing down, and there's nowhere for people to go, and there's anger and there's resentment, and that builds up, and I understand that, but there's nobody else for them to target, and they feel that they have to target someone, and we are unfortunately, that punch bag.
And it is the worst it's ever been.
Yeah,
by some distance, absolutely. I suspect.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for what you do, and B, thank you for your contribution to the programme today. 27 minutes after 11 is the time. It's obviously not just me. And I don't want to talk about class today, because the idea that your class makes you more likely to... I suppose there may be a class-based distinction between people who spread lies online that are designed to turn people against the police and people who are not regulated enough to turn up, and that's not class though, is it? But I share my shock at how disgusting what we've seen clearly is, and wonder, A, how it happened, why it happened, and B, what it does. What's it like if you know your husband's actually out there, coming under attack from people like Luke Moran, the father of 3 who left a police officer fearing for their life? If Luke Moran's children are under threat tomorrow, the people who he was, put them in their own words, in fear of their life, will be the ones rushing to his children's aid. Am I sounding stupid asking these questions? Is it obvious to you why this? I cannot get my head around how a father of 3 can think that the police are his enemy, when he knows that if his children were in peril or in trouble tomorrow, the only people to whom he could turn would be the police. 28 minutes after 11 is the time. Tony's in Barnsley. Tony, what would you like to say?
Yeah, sorry. Hi. Just trying to get you off pause there. I was a former chief police officer and was in the service for over 30 years. And whilst I've heard some of these academic conversations about the police being symbols of power and control, I think it's down to 2 things, really. I think the politicians' arrogance and indifference to the police, certainly in the Tories, has had a significant effect on people. The police can't do anything right. The police are awful. The police are incompetent.
Give me some examples. Give me some examples of that, if you can. I don't want to put you on the spot. But I'm not thinking that a bloke with a brick in Rotherham is not reading the parliamentary sketches every day and following, the latest Tory Home Secretary's speeches, are they? I don't want to sound dismissive.
James, they're not. But I was just going to say that's then linked to a media that appears to delight some sections of it in baiting the public. So where you have former Home Secretaries who are openly critical of the police service, saying that there's 2-tier policing, suggesting that somehow if you were a Muslim or a person who's from a visible ethnic minority community, you get a better deal. That fans the flames of people who then would look at this and say, well, look, I trust these people, I trust these media outlets, and look, the police are against us. You then link that to the othering that's going on, and it's really quite hard for the police to do anything right. And as a black police officer, I found that being on the front line with my colleagues, the explicit targeting of some minority officers was absolutely horrendous. So I'm not suggesting this is a new phenomenon, but it seems to have been accelerated by the media. And I've got to say the dismissive attitude of some of our politicians.
I can't argue with that. I mean, I sometimes look back. I said quite early on after the last election, Tony, that we're going to look back on things that happened relatively recently and do double takes. We're going to actually struggle to believe that actually happened. And I remember when Suella Braverman essentially, well, she ended up being accused of being out of control and unhinged for extraordinary comments claiming that the Metropolitan Police is biased and somehow favoured people marching for a ceasefire in Palestine over far-right potential protesters who wanted to march on Armistice Day. It's an actual Home Secretary. I think that's the kind of politician you're talking about.
Absolutely. I mean, we don't want political platitudes where you say, the police are really brave, etc., because the police should and must be held to account when they do things wrong. But where you've got a social media, and using your terms from your book, when you talk about the effective othering of people, so these police officers...
But I've never seen... There's no effort that's been put into othering the police, is there? I think it was... I want to get that. It was Dal Babu, former police chief superintendent in the Met, who went pretty far. I've never known an occasion for the Home Secretary to get involved in operational policing at this level. She doesn't understand the law. She doesn't understand the legislation. This is operational policing matters. This has emboldened far-right groups to come out who perhaps weren't looking to come out. So it's going to make the job for the police much more difficult than it would have been. He's pretty much stating that the same kind of characters that turned up at the Farage riots were turning up at the Armistice Day or wanted to turn up on Armistice Day. He's pretty much stating that the targets painted on the police's back in those contexts were painted by the serving Home Secretary, which you are obviously in full agreement with.
Yeah, I think that, Dell's slightly mistaken in that the Home Secretary behind the scenes, of course, challenges whatever police chief constable in a particular area. Yeah. The public condemnation of the decisions that the police made, which is then sort of...
It's the going public that's the problem.
Sound bites of TikTok.
Yeah,
it's deeply unhelpful.
And it does reach the other sections of society, even if they're not plugged into the 10 o'clock news every night, because they will be on TikTok or they will be on Twitter, and it will reach them as almost a permission from Suella Braverman or an incitement. And if it's coming from the Home Office, then where does the self-regulation kick in? Thank you, Tony. Thomas Watts is up next with your headlines. The time is 11:33. 11:35 is the time. We wade back in shortly to that territory that we were exploring last week. The lack of particular engagement in the question of who's going to be the next Conservative Party leader. I think we have to start getting a little bit more interested than we necessarily are currently. And Natasha will join us after 11:45 to talk us through where that particular race currently stands and who is ahead or behind. This is from someone who asked to remain anonymous. I'm a detective with 29 years service. All of my time has been at the sharp end. I've been a firearms officer for over 20 years. The police service is falling apart and I can't wait to leave. My wife is also a long-serving mounted officer, and my son, who is 12, has nightmares about us being killed or injured at work. Resignations are rocketing. Our senior officers are useless, with no discernible experience or skills. I fear for the future, and I tell anyone who's thinking about joining to avoid it like the plague. These are sad times. And yet, of course, the worse the times, the bigger the need for good people in jobs like the one that you currently do. But who the hell am I to try and talk you out of it or to argue with your 29 years worth of experience, which means you're nearly at the end of the line anyway, doesn't it? 11:37 is the time. I've got a pile in front of me of stories. I don't know which one you've picked up on. A father of 3 who left a police officer fearing for their life as he tried to smash a van window has been jailed for 3 years. A man who charged at police officers with a metal bench is among 3 men who have been jailed for their part in violent unrest in Hull. A mother of 6 who threw a brick at police in Hartlepool, jailed. A man has admitted battering a police van as officers were trapped inside and left fearing for their lives during rioting in Southport. A 15-year-old boy has become the first person charged with an offence of riot following the recent disorder. And so it goes on. There's a particularly unpleasant one involving the person that was, I don't know if you saw a mob setting upon a man in Manchester, in Piccadilly Gardens in Manchester, for the simple offence of being black. And the person that was filming it and encouraging that attack was in court, I think, yesterday, and details of things that he had done before were certainly notable. I may share them with you shortly. But why? I mean, is it simply that the police were stopping them from setting fire to hotels containing asylum seekers or setting fire to mosques, in which case it's the hatred of asylum seekers and the very carefully fomented Islamophobia that is the answer to the question? Or were these people, as it appears to me, were they actually primed to attack the police? In which case, how were they primed? Joseph's in Middlesbrough. Joseph, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, mate.
What it is, I mean, obviously, over the years, I've seen quite a lot of riots on TV. Obviously, never partook in any, but I've seen a lot of riots. And I've always thought that the police have always been targeted, regardless of the whatever the issue is. I hark back to the poll tax riots, which, in my opinion, was very, very violent. I mean, I don't know if you can recall the guy who put that sword through the window of the police car.
No, that's a very good point. Yes.
Or whatever it was. But my point isn't that, James. What my point is I believe that over the last 14 years there's a lot of frustration, and there's no particular reason why these riots happen. It's a culmination of a lot of things, and I think what has happened, right, is people that are frustrated, they almost see the police as a representation of the government, like, because they are basically a government body and they are paid for by the police. And the people believe that the politicians won't talk to them, they won't listen to them or whatever. So they see the police as that final frontier. Let's, if we do this, maybe we'll get listened to. I'm not saying it's correct. It was totally wrong what everybody did, and they went about it the wrong way. But that, in my opinion, is the way that I see it.
Which is less complicated than some of the other analyses. I mean, it is simply an extension of the state, which makes that moment where Suella Braverman essentially, according to some senior police officers, almost it made their job harder or makes it even weirder, doesn't it? The attempt by some right-wing politicians now to portray the police as the enemy of the people rather than as an extension of the government, of politics.
No, yeah, exactly. The police definitely aren't the enemy. Obviously, I've been listening to your programme, and with the first people, as soon as we all get into a bit of trouble, not bit of trouble, if we're alarmed about something or we're panicking about something or there's a crime being committed, what's the first thing we do? We pick up the phone and phone the police.
Yes, exactly
or
that.
If somebody's prowling around your house, what do? You phone the police. So, yeah, but I'm not making excuses for the people that write it, but I really, really do believe that there's a lot of intense frustration as gathered in the last 14 years. And a lot of people went to these riots for different reasons. It wasn't just about Muslims. It wasn't just about the asylum seekers. It was about austerity also. It's about a lot of things, James, and that's what people need to understand. There's a massive problem here. What the government need to sort out. They can't just throw people in jail for the sake of throwing people in jail. Yes, they were wrong what they did, but they've got to get to the heart of the problem. There's a lot wrong in this country. There's a lot wrong with society. We've got people starving.
Yeah, but the people that I mean, everyone's affected by austerity. The police, arguably, more than anybody. A 15-year-old boy charged with rioting, violent disorder and the burglary of a vape shop. He's not objecting against government economic policies, Joseph.
He is, though, because he's fully educated.
No, he might be a consequence of government economic policies, but he's not lobbing bricks at police officers in order to register his unhappiness about the closure of the local library.
I know that, but the people that brought him into this world and bring him up, they are poorly educated because of what's
there's something
going
on,
in that. So that kid, he doesn't stand a chance, does he, now in life?
No, well, not unless we start. Well, you say that he could become an MP in reform because one of Farage's MPs was in jail years ago for attacking a woman. So there are some people who are allowed to be rehabilitated from the worst kind of offences. So you don't write him off entirely. But no, generally speaking, if you're in this kind of trouble at 15, then you're unlikely to go on to lead a rich and fruitful existence.
I mean, my hometown is Middlesbrough, so I actually watched the riots on Sky TV with a lot of interest, and it was so sad to see my hometown being smashed up. Wasn't impressed at all. But you've got to see the poverty up here to believe it. It's insane, mate. Honestly, it's really insane.
Where we touched on. Go on.
I spend a lot of time down south. I'm actually driving down south today. I've got a friend that I go and see occasionally down south. And the difference between the two worlds is mega. It's vast, educationally wise, facility wise, transport wise. It's another world. Honestly, it really is another world. So that's the reason, partly why I think the riots were mainly in the north, because the north is so, I don't like to say hard done to or ignored or however you'd like to put it. It really is. So there's a big divide there. And this levelling up that was supposed to happen never ever happened.
You've done a great job, actually, of walking the tightrope between explaining and excusing, because it's not easy, that tightrope. It's not easy to walk it. But you can't talk about why things have happened without coming up with answers that will portray the people doing the bad things, if not in a sympathetic light, and you were very careful not to do that, but as being a consequence of things that have happened to them. I think.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joseph. Cheers, man. It's coming up to 11:45. I'm constantly living the question of how much attention you should pay to these people. But when you see the riots and you know some of the reasons why they've happened, you begin to think you should probably address these points a little more often. So here's one. James, you really are a thick moron. Islamophobia is a made-up slogan to beat the white indigenous people over the head with. So you lot are Christophobes, racist bigots, you self-hating far-left liberal. To which the question becomes, well, why would they try to set fire to a mosque, mate? What is it about a mosque that drew particular fury or disgust in the aftermath of claims that a crime had been committed by someone of the same faith that worships in mosques, even though it wasn't true? So what word would you use to describe the entirely unjustified and irrational hatred of people of the Muslim faith? So, I mean, all words are made up at some point. Like nincompoop. Someone made up the word nincompoop even before they'd met you. It is 11:47. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I will, I think, talk you through the story that I think highlights many of the issues that are currently blighting conversation, blighting public discourse, the poison and the lies being poured into the ears of millions of people, of course, on social media, never more so than since Elon Musk purchased Twitter, really lend themselves to febrile atmospheres and dangerous atmospheres. So dangerous, in fact, that police can end up with targets on their back in hideous ways. And I'm almost encouraged by Joseph. If this is just a normal instance of police getting it in the neck when people are rioting, as opposed to something more sinister or something more groomed, if you like, then that's the closest you can get to reassurance at the current time. But it's not reassuring for members of police officers' families or indeed for police officers themselves. I can't remember whether you were on holiday or not, Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor. I tried to inject some excitement a couple of weeks ago into the Tory leadership campaign.
How did that go?
Not well. I mean, it is fair to say that people don't care. So we should probably begin with the question of why don't they care, which I suppose has something to do with the recency of the general election, the size of the Labour majority, and a kind of so much in fatigue I've seen used to describe some of the disillusion with Donald Trump in America, or even people that previously liked all of his fireworks and excesses, are kind of now just sort of think, I'm just exhausted by this. But there are 6 contenders, and they will be the leader of Her Majesty's opposition, and yet people are not really engaged. Your world must be engaged. You must be engaged.
A little bit, but
only
yes.
a little. A political editor of LBC. I'm a little bit engaged.
I am very interested and very engaged, of course. But yes, it's a perfect storm of, we've just had an election. Keir Starmer has a huge majority. The public, I think, are a bit bored and sick of politics, not least of all the Conservative Party, of course. They've been in power for so long, and now people are really keen to just let, I think, politicians get on with it. Of course, as well, it's the summer break. Everybody is thinking about their summer holidays and not another Tory leadership contest. So I think that's been a big part of that.
What's the timetable? What's the calendar?
So at the moment, we've got 6 candidates: Kemi Badenoch, James Cleverly, Robert Jenrick, Priti Patel, Mel Stride and Tom Tugendhat. And at the moment, it is that they all got enough nominations to get through to the first part. It's going to be whittled down to 4
When?
At the beginning of September.
Okay, so quite soon.
A couple of weeks' time, and that will be MPs. It's the first week back.
Okay.
So there could be potentially a number of rounds, depending on how many
as things
they get.
stand, who's going to be out? Mel Stride has not set the...
Yeah, I think it is going to be goodbye to Mr. Stride, I'm afraid, come that first round. And then I think it's a little bit up for grabs about who does make it through to the final four. We've not heard a lot from Kemi Badenoch. She's widely considered the front runner. There is a poll out today.
Well, that's why we're talking
which
about
is why we're talking about this today.
YouGov have polled, and she's way ahead.
Yes, she is way ahead. Kemi Badenoch on 24%, Tom Tugendhat in second place on 16%. So this is the percentage of people, according to Tory members, saying that this is their preferred candidate. It's actually really difficult to look at the polls at the moment, James, because they've all polled slightly different issues. So we've had one preferred candidate, we've had one, favourability ratings, and I think we've had one which was, again, slightly a different question. So it's really hard to compare them. And if you look at polls as well by the public as well, that, again, these are all different questions because at the moment...
Last one I saw, James Cleverly was ahead.
Yeah, he is. There was one poll as well by YouGov as well saying that Tom Tugendhat had the highest net favourability rating among the public. So these are people, again, very different to what they're going for at the moment, which is the MP vote. So for the next 4 weeks to 6 weeks at least, they are going to be trying to attract MPs to get behind that campaign. After that, it is the Tory membership. Of course, we know, and then again, obviously, that after that will be the public thinking about who they might want to win them an actual election. So these are three very, very different polls showing three very different things because those people just don't think the same.
And of course, still undecided MPs and members of the Conservative Party. Do we know how many nominations each of these six got?
I don't have those figures in front of me at the moment in terms of who was
because is it possible that the person most popular among the membership, which of course not long ago was Liz Truss, could end up not making the cut because remaining MPs are conscious of who might be most popular among the public?
Yes, so I think that's definitely going to form into a part of what these people are doing in their campaigns right now. So you've had people like Tom Tugendhat, who I think most people think are a bit more on the centre of the Conservative Party, again with James Cleverly, but also Tom Tugendhat talking about leading the ECHR and trying to reach out to, I think, those right of the party. You've got Robert Jenrick as well talking about how to address the reform threat, but arguably there's no one really talking about how to win back seats from the Liberal Democrats. Again, something that in the last election they won a lot of seats for. Priti Patel, again, seen as someone a bit more on the right of the Conservative Party. Mel Stride, again, another centrist. So therefore, there are a lot of competing factions.
There's such a thing. Can you be a centrist if you were part of any of the last three governments? I mean, traditionally speaking, because Tugendhat was supposed to be a centrist as well, and now he's calling for as you say, a withdrawal from the ECHR.
Yeah, I think
Mel Stride definitely would have been a centrist once, but if you've been in a Johnson, a Truss or a Sunak administration, then it's a bit of a stretch.
It is, and arguably, we talk about the One Nation group of Conservatives as that's sort of the nearest thing to the centre, sort of left of the Conservative Party, if there is such a thing. And yes, you're completely right, and all of these people have been tarred by the last few Conservative administrations. Arguably, could we say Priti Patel potentially at the moment? She's not served for the last two governments, but of course she served as Immigration and Home Secretary. I'm sure other candidates are going to be quick to remind everybody of their record in government. Kemi Badenoch obviously recently serving, Tom Tugendhat recently serving, James Cleverly as well, arguably will all be tarred with, isn't this just more of the same from the Conservatives? Are you really going to be offering something fresh and different when you served under Rishi Sunak just a couple of weeks ago?
You've either been very close to Truss, Johnson or Sunak, as I say. So Kemi Badenoch, Tom Tugendhat, James Cleverly, Robert Jenrick, Priti Patel, Mel Stride. Is Robert Jenrick, he seems to be the most committed to being on manoeuvres at the moment, shrugging off, of course, his involvement in the unlawful but successful attempts to spare a Tory donor the inconvenience of paying 40 or 45 million pounds in tax on a property development, and best known still perhaps for ordering the painting over of murals in a welcome centre for unaccompanied child asylum seekers because he was worried that their lives were a bit too pleasant and a bit too easy. But he seems to be the most obviously ambitious for the job in public at the moment.
Yes, and it is August, so we're not seeing that kind of scramble at the moment. I think that will start in earnest probably next week when people start to come back from the holidays and think about the next couple of weeks. But yeah, Kemi Badenoch, arguably the front runner. We haven't heard much from her at all this summer, maybe assuming that she's still in the lead. She's still in front of MPs and doesn't need to do a whole lot of work. But equally, I've been speaking to people in other camps who think that she's essentially thrown that away by not campaigning for the last few weeks, and they're feeling more confident that they will be able to make more of an impact because she's not been making the case in public. We've not heard from her at all.
Somebody very clever said to me that Kemi Badenoch's biggest problem is that she hates journalists.
I think she does have an issue with the media. Yeah, I think she doesn't. She
diplomatically
doesn't like
put, because
she doesn't like speaking to journalists,
and you can't fake it. Which she will presumably have to do. She will have to contact people and hope that they will help her, even though they know that she... reasons for holding journalists in contempt are myriad, but she sometimes gives the impression of thinking that nobody should really be allowed to question her, which is a terrible attitude to take into a press conference.
Yeah, it's sadly something that a lot of politicians hold, and not just Kemi. And to be...
But she struggles the most to hide it, I think, out of any I can think of in recent years.
Yeah, she does. And
Nadine Dorries, but she had journalists that she loved, whereas Badenoch seems to have a problem with all of them.
Yeah, I think every politician has journalists that they're friendly with and close with, but I think Kemi has a particular set of people that she's close with, and yeah, you're completely right. We will probably not be seeing as much of her on the media and on the airwaves as we will be the other contenders, who I think will be far more keen to come on LBC and talk to us. But equally, the offer is open to all leadership contenders to come on.
How closely are you watching events in America?
Ish is the answer.
And
ish closely.
What are we thinking? A successful convention for the Democrats?
Yeah, pretty much. I'm finding it really interesting how it seems to be a lot closer than I think it was 6 months ago.
Definitely.
I think, was it your show that I came on and said I think Trump was going to win 6 months ago?
I think I raised an eyebrow.
And
a history of these kind of exchanges.
Well, I've definitely changed my mind now.
There's no point having a mind if you never change it. Natasha.
Exactly. But no, I think it's everybody that was.
And to be fair, that was a battle between Donald Trump and Joe Biden.
Yeah, I think that he would have won in that case. But now we are in a really different position, and all of those critics who were saying to Kamala Harris, actually, it's not your time, or we should let Joe get on with it, have probably been proved right. The polls, the ones I'm looking at, the betting markets, the ones I'm looking at, showing that it's a lot closer, I think, than other.
Speaking of betting markets.
Oh no, you're not going to make me bet on something else.
No. Which Conservative leader, candidate, do you think I may have put a small wager on?
Can I ask you why you did that?
Because I thought that it was going to be a much more exciting battle than it has proved to be.
I see.
And I thought that it might be a space into which dark horses could make extraordinary moves. And I thought that because somebody had worked very hard during the election campaign, when most other Conservative politicians seem to be at the dentist, I thought that one of these candidates might actually outperform expectations.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, that is possibly the stupidest bet I've ever placed in my life.
2%, according to the latest
and counting,
poll.
Natasha, and counting.
Who would you like to
lead the Conservative parties? That's a brilliant question, because I would have said not that long ago Tom Tugendhat, who I used to know a bit, in the context of desperately trying to avoid all politicians at all opportunities. Occasionally, if I'm picking up an award at the House of Commons or something like that, then I have no choice but to talk to him. And I found him very clubbable, and I liked some of his attitudes, and I love backstories. I love the fact, for example, that I think it was Tugendhat's uncle who stood against Alf Dubs as would have been the Liberal candidate in the City of Westminster seat decades ago, when they were both kinder transport children, and one had become a Conservative and one had become a Liberal. And I like the Britain that portrays, and I saw Tugendhat as a successor of his uncle's politics. The fact that what we call right wing now is a different thing to what we could have called right wing then, but he seems to have, I don't know whether he's swallowed the Kool-Aid or whether he's just sort of swilling it around in his mouth in the hope of spitting it out after he secures the top job.
I think you might be right. Look, he's trying to appeal to Tory members at the moment, and he's trying to appeal to MPs who are really worried about the threat of reform. Whether rightly or wrongly, they should be worried about the threat from the Liberal Democrats and other parties, but that's the way many people and many Tory members are thinking at the moment. So it's a tricky one.
Natasha Clark, many thanks indeed, LBC's political editor, having a little nibble at both sides of the Atlantic. Up next, a complete change of pace. If I tell you it's a story prompted by news that parents are much more likely to help sons buy a home than daughters, I wonder whether you can guess what the broader question I'm going to ask you in a minute will be. The time now is 12 noon. It is 3 minutes after 12. I don't know how helpful it is to you when I use myself as a lens through which to explore a story. It's not self-referential these days because I generally do it in a way that casts me, or at least me not long ago, in a negative light. So listen, what I mean by that is I think that if you'd met me in my younger years, I could have made quite a strong case for the fact that my parents sent me to boarding school but didn't send my daughter. And the case that I would make would have hinged upon things like, well, I will have to be a provider one day, or I will have to be the main earner, and therefore, if resources are limited, my sister had a brilliant education. She went to a private school in Birmingham. But I went away, as you know, because I mention it whenever we talk about education, because it's important. I went away to school in the north of it, miles away. I went to boarding school, a big famous public school. And I'm not one of those people who thinks that any success I've enjoyed subsequently is not entirely based upon the privileges that I enjoyed during and the advantages that I enjoyed during my education. So I hope you find this hard to believe, because you know me quite well by now, but I think, have been somebody who could have made quite a powerful case for the decisions that my parents took in the 1980s to essentially favour one child over the other when it came to the money that you were spending. That was the only way in which I was favoured. It's not like I got better Christmas presents than she did. In fact, one year she got a BMX, and I think I'd gone skiing with the school that year, so they said that will be your main Christmas present. And I thought they were joking. I thought they were going to surprise me on Christmas Day. Just for the record, I only went skiing once in my life. I don't want you to think I was like some sort of full-time silver spoon merchant, but I'm very comfortable talking about luck, serendipity and privilege. But I didn't. It wasn't like my sister got an orange and a jigsaw every Christmas when I got a mini motorbike. They were scrupulously careful, except that one year where if I thought that the ski trip was a holiday, not a present, and that I'd still come around Christmas, I'm going to get a big... Did you get a big present every Christmas and then every year you got one big present and you let Santa know roughly what the big present was going to be, and most years you got it or you got something like it. And then some years you maybe were a little bit disappointed, but a good relationship with your parents would encourage you to make sure when you were writing to Santa that you weren't being too ambitious or you weren't being too hopeful. And then, of course, you get your present from mum and dad as well. It's not just the presents off Santa. I'm talking mostly about the present that you get off mum and dad. So just apart from that one year when she got a BMX and I didn't, and it was a very equal childhood, equally loved, equally treated, equally indulged, equally punished, actually. All of the things were equal, except looking back, this enormous, absolutely enormous element of our childhood where my education cost tens of thousands of pounds more than my sister's. Maybe not tens of thousands in those days, but in real terms, in modern money, tens of thousands of pounds more. And not just the money, but with all of the attendant associations that we talk about endlessly on this programme. We talked about very interestingly yesterday in the context of working class. I love that phrase. We're going to use that again. The immutable characteristics of class. And whatever the opposite of entitlement is. Well, you get the more, the posher the school you go to, the more entitlement you are imbued with. And entitlement is a superpower, whether we like it or not. You walk into a room feeling that you've got the right to be there, you're already 100 places ahead of the person who walks into a room feeling like they haven't got the right to be there. And a lot of it is teaching you how to look like someone who thinks they have got the right to be there, even when inside you're going, I haven't got the right to be here. That's the real trick. That's what they pay the big bucks for. Unless you're a sociopath, of course you're going to feel a little bit intimidated. The trick is to look like you don't. Plausible is how it was once described to me. Someone said as an insult, they said, James, you're so plausible in editorial conference. And I said, well, what do you mean, Ed? Because that was his name. I said, what do you mean, Ed? And he goes, well, even I would believe that the stories you're selling to the editor are good stories. And I know that they're not. I know that they're complete rubbish. I know that you've just read a paragraph in Broadcast magazine and tried to turn it into a 2-page feature about bringing back Enid Blyton's famous fire. Well, It's extraordinary. How on earth did you know that? So unentitlement. Untitlement is good, Callum suggests. Can't believe nobody said that yesterday. So I get it a bit. But I didn't think it would be going on now. The Bank of Mum and Dad gives, on average, £13,000 more to sons than it does to daughters in order to help them get onto the housing ladder. So, look, first up, we're already talking about a very privileged cohort of society, i.e. young people under 30 who can afford to get onto the housing ladder, almost always with parental support. But I am going to extend this conversation beyond house buying. This is the statistic that drew my eye yesterday morning, in fact, but we didn't have time to talk about it. The gap, I'll tell you, here's a good game. What do you think the gap is between how long it takes you? What those who can rely on parental support can buy a home how much sooner than those who can't? So remember, this is only a comparison between people who buy homes. So if you're buying a home and mum and dad can help you, how much quicker do you think you'll get a foot on the housing ladder than if mum and dad can't help you, but you will actually be able to afford to get on the housing ladder, even perhaps while you're under 30, but certainly while you're relatively young? How many? I'll tell you, it's years. How many years do you think it is? And I'll give you. You've got to remind me to give you the answer to that. Oh, Lord above. So just to give you an idea of what a divided, unequal society looks like, parents will be giving their children £9.4 billion this year to help them onto the property ladder. We were talking in the first hour to a daughter whose mum can't afford to heat her flat in Glasgow, both renting. And in the same country, the United Kingdom, £9.4 billion that parents have free or spare to help their children get onto the property ladder. But it's boys who get helped out more. One of the reasons given by a mortgage advisor to the Daily Telegraph is that parents want to get the boys out of the house more than they want to get the girls out of the house. I don't buy that. She adds that girls seem to be much more independent and want to live away from home. I'm often told that the help was unexpected. I don't buy that. I think it's because we still, or many families still, favour the son over the daughter, the brother over the sister. And I want to know what that's like. It doesn't matter how old you are or how far back you go. What we're looking for, in a sense, are the biggest examples of sibling injustice when it comes to parental finance. So I've given you quite a big one. I don't think my sister is particularly resentful about it. I'm not even sure she would have wanted to board. It's not an undilutedly happy experience going away to boarding school, but it is clearly in our society a massive advantage, a massive boost to your future prospects. And the calculation must have been that it is going to be of more use or of more value to a boy than it is to a girl. So it's not really about favouritism, unless you're absolutely certain that the favouritism was built on sex, that it was because your brother was a boy, they preferred him to you. It wasn't because of other reasons. That works, but just favouritism when it could have been the sister that was a favourite. Do you see what I mean? That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for financial proof. Financial proof that the boy, the son, got better treated than the daughter. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. All right, so you know that your brother has received financial help that you wouldn't have received solely and exclusively because he is a boy. All right, what is it? It may be housing. It may just be cash. It may be something else. I think it's a throwback, and Jamie's picked up on this as well. I think it's a genuine throwback to primogeniture. I was looking at a story today that reminded me of someone I used to know. And the person I used to know was the son of the daughter of quite a well-known aristocrat, right? I'll say that again. It's quite hard to keep up. The son of the daughter of an aristocrat. They weren't that well known. Depends what circles you mix in, old boy. The son of the daughter of an aristocrat. But he was also the son of the oldest child of the aristocrat. His mum was the oldest of, I think, 4 siblings. And the second child was a boy. And the boy now lives in a stately home that you can pay to visit if you want. The boy now lives in a stately home. My friend's uncle lives in a stately home. My friend's mum, who was the oldest child, has a house in the grounds of the estate for her exclusive use, but she doesn't even own it. It's still owned by her younger brother. So the history of primogeniture is quite extraordinary. I think they've changed it now. I think it's changed in recent years, but not in time to help my mate, who was oddly unbitter about it. And I used to tease him. I used to say, this is insane. How can your uncle, who he got on perfectly well with, but it meant, of course, that his cousin was going to inherit the stately home, even though he was the oldest child of the last, I forget what the actual title was. And he was perfectly relaxed about it because it had always been that way. Injustice is a fascinating thing when it gets baked into a society. I'm often a bit unkind, perhaps, to people who I describe as doffing their caps or tugging their forelocks. No one would have described my old mate as doffing his cap or tugging his forelock to his uncle, but it simply never occurred to him to complain or object to the fact that his cousin would inherit a stately home that would, by rights, if it was all being passed on to the oldest child, have been his one day. And that was because his uncle was a boy and his mum was a girl. So there's a historical justification to this that no longer applies for one very obvious reason. And that obvious reason is that you as a woman are just as likely to go to work when you leave school or when you leave college as your brother is. And you are increasingly just as likely to need a career that sustains both during and after childbirth. So the idea that you one day are going to be a mum or a housewife, whereas your brother one day is going to be a breadwinner or a supporter of a family, a provider, it's simply not true anymore. So what the hell are these parents doing when they give more money to the boy than the girl? Are they actually still buying into the idea that he is going to have to be more of a breadwinner, more of a provider than his own wife? And therefore their daughter is more likely to be a wife than a provider, than a breadwinner, so she needs less? Or is there something else going on, something that I can't currently discern? A sort of, that's a good phrase from Roddy. Perhaps it's a subconscious replacement of a dowry, James. But it wouldn't be. It's the other way round, mate. The dowry goes to the groom from the wife's family, doesn't it? So that doesn't quite work either. What does what proves to you that you were on the wrong end of prioritizing the male child? What proves it to you? And does it still rankle? I like this conversation. How do you know that this happened to you? What's the proof you've got? Maybe you've got this specific example. When you found out that they'd given your brother money to buy a house, or how much money they'd given your brother to buy a house, you could not believe your ears. And how does it affect you? What impact does it have? What do you carry forward with the knowledge that the people who are supposed to love you most in the world have behaved, at least in financial terms, as if they loved your brother more? 0345 6060 973. I am conscious, as I've mentioned on a few occasions, of having knocked about at some times in my life in elevated circles. But Gordon puts it best. He says, James, mate, you've completely lost me. It all sounds a bit Game of Thrones to me. So let me drag it back from Game of Thrones, back into your sitting room, into your kitchen, into your childhood, when you know, even in 2024, that your brother has had more financial help from your parents than you. I want to know what that feels like, and I want to know why. So if you're the parent I want to know why this still happens. 0345 6060 973. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. 20 minutes after 12 is the time. Nick says, no offence intended. Perhaps your parents thought that your sister was more capable than you and therefore didn't need the level of education as much as, wouldn't benefit from it as much as you would. I wish we were both privately educated, Nick, but I was sent away to boarding. Sent away is the wrong phrase. I went away to boarding school. I didn't have to. I could have said no. I went away to boarding school, to public school, and my sister didn't. And there's a massive inequality there. There's an imbalance, There's a massive imbalance there. And I can't quite conceive of circumstances in which it would have happened the other way round. Do you see what I mean? We spent much more on our daughter's education than we did on our son's. In fact, I bet that family barely exists. And if you do, you'll have a weird explanation for it. So why? Why is the son still more likely to get, either in education or in house buying or in other areas, less perhaps extreme areas, more help than the daughter? Laura's in Sheffield to start things off. Laura, what would you like to say?
Well, James, it happened to me. I've got two elder brothers, and my father had told me in advance that he was going to do different levels of inheritance to us.
Right.
But when it actually happened, and I saw it in black and white on the will, it was still a real shocker. And it still, I mean, he died quite a while ago,
sure.
And but it still made me feel less.
Did he tell you why he was going to divide things unequally?
Yeah, he was very old-fashioned, and he felt that the eldest son should have the most, and then the son next in line. Sorry, I'm quite nervous.
Hey, it's only me.
And then as the daughter, he felt that I shouldn't have as much.
Wow.
And my older brother did get the house because he was living in it and all the contents.
So, I mean, like the mother of all head starts in life, really. Or not head starts, because I presume he wasn't young when your father passed away, but he got the family home. Yeah.
Which we then did sell, and we did divide up a little bit, which did help.
And what did what did the next brother do? And was that in your brother's gift? Did he choose to do that when he didn't have to, according to the will, or was that?
No, I don't think he would have by choice.
And what did your younger brother get? He got more than you as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And they also were involved in the family business. But I've got no issue with that. And,
no, that's fine. But it's doubly unfair because you can subscribe to primogeniture. You can say the oldest son gets everything. But there's a double whammy here because that's not what he did. He gave your younger brother more than you as well just because he's got a penis.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. And also the thing that upset me was when my older brother started selling things in the house.
Yes.
It's like everything. It's not the monetary value. It's the sentimental value. And it really did cause quite a rift. And it just makes you feel really, I can't swear because it's on the radio, it makes you feel really horrible.
Rubbish.
Yeah, rubbish.
Because it feels like love. It feels like you're loved less, right?
Yes. Yeah, and it's really awful and it's really silly. But my husband and I have got a son and daughters, and I am so fair. I've been so fair. It's really quite sad. So, if I went out and I bought the girls something, I'd buy my son like a bar of chocolate or something. It was always, everything has to be completely fair, almost to a ridiculous degree now.
I don't think you can be too fair.
No, and I personally don't believe, and I'm not that young, but sure. I think boys should be treated equally to girls. Girls are very savvy, and boys aren't always so organised and good with money. But it's a fair playing field. And I think guys get hard done by now.
Well, up to a point, Lord Copper. But I understand the point that you're making. I'll ask you this, and it's a tough one. You might not want to answer it, but in your heart of hearts, do you think that your dad loved your brother more than you?
No.
No, I don't either. I'm glad you said that. And yet that the decision that he took, the evidence. I mean, it's weird. So he's in many ways a hostage of his own generation. He's a hostage of his own background. That's why I'm so surprised it's still going on. I thought that the generation of parents who are now contemplating the possibility of their own children becoming homeowners or moving out of home if you're renting, which is a generation to which I'm perilously close, would you believe? I know, I look so young, especially with the new lights in the studio. And the tinted moisturiser. I don't think I'm wearing tinted moisturiser, but anyway, I just look so young. I would have thought that most people would have arrived where Laura is by now, which is the idea of giving more help to the son than the daughter is actually unbelievably absurd. but she feels like a second-class citizen in her own family as a consequence of her loving father's decision. Why? Why would Dad do that then? So why did your dad do it? Why did you do it? 0345 6060973 is the number you need. Simone is in Bracknell. Simone, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm just lost.
Oh, terrible phone line, Simone. We'll try and fix that and get back to you shortly. Tina's in Camden. Tina, what would you like to say?
Just a similar sort of story, really. When my father died, just before he died, having all my life said you're getting the same as your brother, he said, "Oh, by the way, you're not, and the reason is because you're a woman."
How old were you at this point?
Oh, in my early 50s.
Right.
But I was his only daughter and his only child for many years, and that my brother is a lot younger.
Wow.
So I would have been his only child, you see what I mean? And it turned out that the will had been set in place for years. Anyway, he sort of did me a favour.
Go on.
Because I didn't grieve him.
Oh, Lord.
I know, but I sort of went, all right, well, if that's how it is. I mean, I still have a good relationship with my brother, but it was an odd choice because I went, well, the only option I've got really is to go,
But this is, I mean, you say he did you a favour, but that's a trauma. I mean, you lose. So how big was the imbalance, Tina? How big was the difference?
Not probably. He got double, let's say.
Okay, so a lot then. But it's more the principle.
I mean, it's not. It's the print. It very much was the principle. I don't. If he had said, "Well, you don't need it. You're more established. You're older."
Okay.
Etc. All that. But it was very specifically. He said, "This is what our family's always done."
We're back to that again, aren't we?
And I did say, well, it stops now because I've got a boy and a girl, and it stops here, and so does my brother, and both of us will obviously.
Could you imagine saying this to your daughter?
It's absurd.
It's more. I don't know if there's a word that's beyond absurd. Absurder. It's absurdist. It's absolutely ridiculous. Tell me more about the conversation. I presume there was a little bit of spluttering indignation from you, but also, did you get any better explanation out of him? You're a girl.
Well, he was scared. He was scared to say. He'd obviously known it
for a long time, which doubles the betrayal in a way, doesn't it? It exacerbates the betrayal. That all the years you've been getting on brilliantly and loving the bones of your dad, he has known in his in his heart that he's going to favour your. And it was literally just a sort of historical.
It's what happened to him. And it's what happened to his family, and his sisters got less than he did, and it's what and he did, in fact. I mean, I sort of should have known because he did say, "Oh, you should put your son through private school and don't worry about your daughter." He adored his grandchildren, but he did. The indications were there, to be fair.
No, I get it. I mean, well, I never. I'm sorry to hear that, though. I know you see it as a win, but you. And I'm not a psychologist.
I mean, I've got to say, it stops me having to schlep to his grave. That's one good thing.
Flipping heck, that's brutal. But I know what you mean. I mean, it is very hard to forgive something like that because, as with the first caller, it makes you question the love. And you've ended up in different places in relation to that question. But it's such an odd thing to do. It really is. Coming up to 12:30, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. More than, I haven't told you the answer to the question. So more than 3/4 of first-time buyers. Wow. Anyone under 30 who is getting on the housing ladder, more than 3/4 of them got help from their parents. And then they get to write an article for the Daily Telegraph about, I don't know what everyone's complaining about. It's really easy. It's really easy to get on the housing ladder these days. I'm 24. I've just bought my first home. And you read this article and you get to like the 17th paragraph and it says, luckily, Grandma left me her house. Or luckily, Grandma left me £250,000. And Mum and Dad chipped in as well. So it's really easy. It's really easy to get on the housing ladder when you're under 30 if Grandma left you a pot of money and Mum and Dad chipped in too. So it's over 3/4 though. And listen, I'm doing a silly accent, but there's no way all of those people are going to be posh. But they're all going to be fairly well off. But the number, the gap between those who get parental support and those who don't is 6 years. So you get 6 years early, 6 years ahead by dint of getting help. But if you're a girl, you're going to get less help than if you're a boy. And I don't, apart from some sort of slightly, what the word would be, anachronistic nod to medieval or feudal practices, I don't know why that would be. Can we speak to a parent who's still planning to do it? Or would you be too, after the way we've set this conversation up, you're thinking, yeah, right you are, James. Would you please ring in and put your head into the lion's mouth? But if you are planning to do it for reasons that you're confident stand up to scrutiny, I'd love to talk to you after Amelia Cox brings you the latest headlines. It's 12:33. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Timely interview. In fact, you probably like it when this happens. Someone comes onto the programme to comment on the news and we find ourselves thinking, crikey, you'd be a good guest on Full Disclosure. And that is exactly what has happened with this week's guest on Full Disclosure. Neil Basu, former Assistant Commissioner in the Metropolitan Police, former lead for counter-terror police. I mean, an incredible career. He's got a book coming out next year, so he'll be one of those people we actually do twice on Full Disclosure, because we've done the Life and Times today and sort of nibbled at the edges of his professional career and, of course, his experiences of and insights into racism in the police force. But of course, some of the stuff that he worked on, some of the extraordinary events he policed and crimes that he solved, both as a detective and as a counter-terror lead, were, breathtaking. So it's a brilliant interview, but I'm pretty sure it's only going to be part one. I'll play you a little taster of that shortly. But for the time being, back to the question of knowing. If your parents give more money to your brother, how on earth can you convince yourself they don't love him more? That's the tricky bit, I think. Even if they don't, they do, because they gave him more money. Simone's in Bracknell with a better signal. Simone, what would you like to say? Well.
Hi. Yes, basically, I'm the sister, and yes. My brother got the deposit, the money towards the deposit for his house, and I just got my credit card paid off, but my credit card was only sort of £3,000, so nowhere near the amount that he was given.
How did you find out? How did you find out that he'd had a deposit paid for it?
Oh, it was an open discussion. It was an open conversation, and I think.
So mum's got mum and dad, is it, or just mum?
Just mum.
Just mum's got a finite amount of money.
No.
What do you mean?
Not quite, not finite, but basically she was selling her house, and then the profit from that she wanted to give it towards him mainly so that he could. Yeah,
that's what I mean. So she's divvying up a sum of money between the two of you.
Yeah.
And you sit in the room and she says, I'm going to help him buy a house. Here's $3,000 for your credit card bill.
Basically, yeah.
Oh. Yeah. And how did you respond?
But see, this is the thing. I didn't feel like I was loved less. No. I know that was a question you had.
I don't want you to feel like you were loved less. I'm just saying from the outside, it'd be hard not to think that, maybe.
Yeah. I think for me, it was always, I was the one who was more independent, and it was seen that I went off to university, I went and studies, and he didn't want to do the studying thing, but ended up getting headhunted by big companies.
Okay. So he didn't need it more than you then?
He didn't need it. And I think that's the difference.
Well, what reason did she give? What reason did she give for this decision?
And then, again, I think it goes back to that culture, like you say, in terms of boys are seen to be more, I don't know, just in need of that extra support, maybe.
So we're infantilizing then, because you're the second sister to say that.
Yeah.
The second sister on the wrong end of discrimination, sibling-based discrimination, sex-based sibling discrimination, I'd call it, if I was a sociologist, which I'm not. And you're both subscribing to the idea that boys can't look after themselves as well as girls can. Therefore, they somehow deserve the money that should have been by rights yours.
I mean, the phrase that she said to him is, I'm not kicking you out, but you're not moving with me. And I had already, but I had moved out 10 years prior. So.
Well, that's really, really interesting, because that is exactly the reason given by a mortgage advisor in the coverage in one newspaper that I dismissed a moment ago, because it said it tends to be the parents of boys that help out, often because they would quite like them out of the house. Girls seem to be much more independent and want to live away from home. So I'm often told that the help was unexpected and they're really pleased, but it comes with that kind of encouragement to sling your hook. And that's why you're okay with it, and actually when you explain it like that, it makes sense.
Yeah, basically, because I was already out of the house. I went to university, never kind of went back, whereas, you know, he sort of stayed in the house until she eventually sold the house.
That's
and he
enough
had to
now.
go.
Sold the house from under him and helped him.
Yeah.
Are you a homeowner?
No.
Ooh, that's not the answer I was expecting.
No, but then I guess my choice is I've decided to travel the world more and live more independently in that respect and free. And he's done bought the house, got a nice big house now, you know, from the second sale of the house.
Yeah.
And, you know,
that's an interesting one, isn't it? But you sound at peace with it, so I'm not going to try and introduce any frictions or tensions into your relationship.
If she sells a second house, I definitely will be bringing this up.
Yeah, well, I think you should do. It's a funny one, isn't it? Lovely stuff, Sivo. Thank you. I'm glad we got that line back up. There's no obvious answer. There's no repetition, is there? There's elements are being repeated, but it's about, I'm a little uncomfortable, possibly because I don't have boys, I don't have sons. I'm a little uncomfortable with this idea that, they can't look after themselves. That's two now. Need a little bit more help. But he's ended up with a massive house. You're still renting. Sophia is in Tower Hamlets. Sophia, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
how are
Sophia.
you?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
First time caller, very nervous.
It's only me. There's nothing to be nervous about. Go on, what happened?
Okay, so basically, I'll just give you a little bit of a background on me. So I'm from an Asian culture, and I'm the seventh child out of seven. So mum and dad always favoured the sons because they thought they were more responsible, much more equipped to deal with life than the daughters. So basically, then my mum and dad separated when I was 11, and then I was living with mum. Mum developed dementia. And then I ended up caring for her because then when that happened, everyone took a back seat, especially the sons. And
really? They melted away a bit, did they?
That's it, you know? Like, it was like, where are they now, Mum? And she was like, she didn't have anything to say. I was like, look, you favoured the sons more than the daughters.
Growing up. This is growing up.
Yeah, this is growing up. I mean, push comes to shove, where are they? So it was all left on my shoulders to look after her. But I never really did it for the money, you know. No. I did it because it was the right thing to do. But up until the end, you know, they still got everything, and that's where I'm. Really,
she left everything to your brothers.
Yeah.
When she passed away, even after how many years did you spend caring for her, if you don't mind me asking?
So literally about 12 years. Because I moved out, because I just had enough of everything that was going on in the house. I was sick of the culture, you know, the dynamics, and I didn't want to live that life. So I moved out. I came to London. So I was working a full-time job, and then I was at mum's on the weekend looking after her because, you know, I just felt like,
So were they still, they were, have you got 6 brothers or are there sisters there as well?
3 brothers and 3 sisters, And
I love the way you had to pause there and count it in your head. There, I could have told you. Once you told me you were the child of 7 and you had 3 brothers, I could have filled in the last bit for you if you'd asked me, Sophia. So, and no one else. You did more than all 6 of them to care for your mum.
Yeah.
And she divided the estate, and when she passed away, the money went all to the 3 sons. It was divided equally between the 3 sons.
Well, that's what I think.
Yeah.
What's happened because. Up until this day, I don't really know what happened.
But you got all you know is what you got.
I didn't get nothing.
I didn't get nothing. But do you know what? I'm happier than they are.
How
do you know?
Because I am.
Well, you sound very happy. I have to say, you sound very happy. But I don't know how you know that you're happier than they are. If they ring in next, they might sound happier than you.
I doubt it. They haven't got the
joy. They haven't got the joy in their life.
Yeah,
but do you think Mum was punishing? Well, no, because you were going back every weekend. But you clearly, when you say you'd had enough of the culture, you turned your back on elements of family life, even though you did your loving duty as a daughter.
Yeah.
But
I didn't turn my back on what I was supposed to do, even though I moved out, which was frowned upon, you know. But I thought, forget society. I'm going to do what I do,
and that's why you're happier.
Yes, I am.
There you go. You see, I can't believe it.
I have a lot.
No.
I may not have a lot, but I'm content. And I know that I did everything for my parents, especially for my mum. And I know that, you know,
your conscience is clear. Your conscience is clear. And
absolutely.
So is your bank account.
It could be better, but I'm content.
No, you sound like you've got it sorted. You really do. In fact, someone picked up on the fact that I asked you how you were. I never do that. People ring in and say, "How are you?" And I go, "Fine," and then crack on with the call. But to you, because something was infectious about your joie de vivre, I broke the habit of a lifetime and asked you back how you were. So, guys, because I knew you were happy, you see, subconsciously. 12:43. Neil Basu's career in the Metropolitan Police also unfolded against cultural background, an Indian father and a Welsh mother at a time when...
Strong in each other's arms where we belong. Through the storm and through the fire, our bond will never tire. As the years go passing by, our friendship shines, it cannot die. For in our hearts we always know, brotherhood will forever grow.
That was unheard of, actually, when he grew up. He touches on some of that in our full disclosure interview. But the bit I'm going to play you is about the moment he joined the police, or the process of joining the police, the decision to do so. Because the second hour, in fact, some of the reason why I wanted to have the conversation we had in the second hour was because of the abuse of people with a genuine sense of public duty that we saw during the riots. And that was why we spoke to Neil on the show, and it was while speaking to him on the show that we booked him for the podcast.
I met a lot of people who had policing in their families and they wanted to be a police officer since they were kids. I never had that. It was much later in life.
Just tell me a bit, this may be part of mythology rather than fact, but the BBC documentary Black and Blue played a part in your thinking.
Yeah, I'd watched it like so many other people had watched it. And of course it was supposed to be about the hopes and ambitions of black and brown recruits at Hendon, which is the place I was going to go. And I'll short circuit it. It was horrific.
Right.
It was about how their hopes and dreams were dashed, about the racism they suffered. And my friends, and probably my family, although they kept it to themselves, but my friends didn't, said, "Why on earth are you joining a corrupt and racist organisation?" That's a pretty dramatic thing for your friends to say to you, And also, they thought we were all thick. Why are you wasting your education joining policing?
But why didn't it put you off?
If I was going to not go into a career because I was worried about facing racism, that would have been ridiculous because I'd faced it since I was 5.
Okay.
So the point was that wasn't going to be the determination.
And it had the opposite effect. If you'd been prevaricating about it, you'd think, well, I'm not going to be excluded from anywhere by these kind of attitudes. Therefore, I'm doubly determined to go to Hendon to sign up on what was by now a graduate programme, actually. The timing was quite serendipitous, I think.
Yeah, the Home Office were running a graduate programme and I got on that.
And did anyone try, when you got to Hendon, did anyone try and bully you?
Not directly. I mean, what the interesting thing that happened to me at Hendon was one of my instructors, Frida Holdness, who was the first female Indian sergeant in the Met, so she'd broken more glass ceilings than I've ever been near. She came to me and said the Commandant would like you to be the new face of the 1993 graduate recruitment brochure. And I went, oh, that's interesting. And that status thing made me think, oh, well, that's quite nice, somebody asking me to do something. And I did absolutely, she could see my face light up and she said, if you do this, I won't speak to you again. And I said, why? And she said, well, I was in an intake, several intakes for that year, total number of people, probably over 300. There was a black man, an Indian, Sikh Indian turban wearing, who is a good friend of mine, and an Indian woman. And he said he didn't want those 3, but you'll do. And I said this to a group of people that I mentor in the Met, and one of them said, because you were the whitest of the 4 of you. And that was true, and Farida knew it. And I went, oh, I know you're right, Farida, but if I do it and somebody who looks like me joins the police, it will be entirely worth it. And that was part of the reason for joining, that I thought, well, I can be an example to other people if I carry on with this. And that was, so it was both a kind of informal piece of racism, institutional racism, and also a brilliant opportunity to stand up against it when I didn't have any power or rank, when I was literally 6 weeks in training school.
So you did it?
So I did it, yeah. And I think probably...
did she forgive you?
One more person was hired on the Home Office scheme of colour in the next 4 years. So it wasn't exactly a success.
12:47 is the time. Fascinating bloke, clever bloke as well. And did something. I noticed this in the interviews. This isn't a criticism of anybody else, but there are two types in this very specific context. There are two types of interviewees. I don't know which one I'd be. I hope I'd be the one I'm about to describe as opposed to the other one. But it's not conscious. Some people name check important influencers routinely in the course of telling their life story. And full disclosure is usually a life story. And some people don't. So some people might, and it's not, I promise you it's not a criticism. I just find it really engaging. Someone says, I had a brilliant English teacher at secondary school. And someone says, Mr. Philcox at secondary school. Just that difference there. I don't know why. That's why I love interviewing, because it's constantly surprising and you find yourself asking yourself questions even as you're asking the subject a question. But that's Neil Basu, one of the most interesting and effective police officers of the last several decades in this country. It's 12:48. 10 to 1 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. 30 doctors, surgeons, nurses and medical professionals based ordinarily in the UK, but who have been volunteering in Gaza since the October the 7th attack in last year, have written to Keir Starmer calling for his government to cease the sale of arms to the Israeli government, who of course continue to inflict unprecedented carnage upon the people in the Gaza Strip. And it's an interesting letter for two reasons. The first is obvious. Returns attention, draws much needed attention to the continuing carnage. But the fourth paragraph of the letter that they've sent to Downing Street states, we are among the only neutral observers who have been permitted to enter the Gaza Strip. And that's something we've returned to again and again on this programme with people from a variety of perspectives. The question of why neutral observers, international journalists, the Matt Frys, the Lise Doucets are prevented from actually reporting upon the things that they've dedicated, the sort of things that they've dedicated their lives to reporting on. And it creates an environment in which statistics can be challenged, reports can be queried, claims can be made that good faith reporting is not good faith reporting. It's just, in many ways, as someone who tries to provide fair coverage of the continuing catastrophes, it's the hardest fact sometimes to negotiate. It's indefensible, in my view. But here are 30 people who can describe themselves fairly and accurately as neutral observers, and who can therefore give us an idea of what is actually going on in the places that the cameras often can't reach. Dr. James Smith is one of the doctors that volunteered in Gaza, and indeed one of the signatories to the letter. So we'll begin, if I may, James, with what it was like when you were there, what you witnessed, what the conditions are now for the people still being shunted around Gaza.
So, James, I was in Gaza twice over the course of the last 10 months. The first time was with the first British emergency medical team to enter Gaza the day, Boxing Day of last year. We stayed there for 2 weeks with a team of surgeons and nurses and emergency physicians. I've worked in the humanitarian sector now for the entirety of my professional career, and I have never worked anywhere that was as violent, as frightening, and as unstable as Gaza was then, and as Gaza still is now. I returned again in April and ended up staying for nearly 2 months. That was an unscheduled 2-month period. And I say unscheduled because during that period, the Israeli occupation forces invaded the south of Gaza. At that time, of course, there was a lot of deliberation around the so-called red line, which would be to avoid, which was supposed to be avoiding an invasion of Rafah, the city into which tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, in fact, of Palestinians had fled from the north and the middle areas. And the Israeli military invaded that city and now completely occupied that city. And we were unable to leave for close to 2 months because the border crossing between Egypt and Gaza was completely destroyed.
It's hard to read this letter, as anyone listening to this would expect, with only marginal exceptions. Everyone in Gaza is sick, injured, or both. This includes every national aid worker, every international volunteer, and every man, woman, and child. Virtually every child under the age of 5 we encountered, both inside and outside the hospital, had both a cough and watery diarrhoea, jaundice, hepatitis A, widespread in the hospitals where we worked, surgical complication rate near 100%. All of us treated children who seem to have been deliberately targeted by military violence. Bullet wounds to children's heads and torsos and amputations of limbs and eyes of children were commonplace. And it goes on. It goes on and on and on and on. And that's why the next question I ask you may seem an odd one, but how much good can you actually do in the face of such horrors?
I think this is actually a really important question, because the simple answer to that is that there is very little that you can do as a medical or humanitarian worker under such conditions. If we talk about genocide, the notion of genocide, what we're dealing with here is a situation in which the powers that be are attempting to exterminate, in whole or in part, is the terminology in the Genocide Convention. Now, we also have a situation wherein, prior to October of last year, the Israeli state maintained complete control over the Gaza Strip. And several commentators have described effectively a titration mechanism whereby the Israeli state determines how much humanitarian assistance is permitted to enter into Gaza at any given moment. And the Israeli military have acknowledged this themselves. They've talked about the minimum kind of calorific quantity of food aid that they would permit to enter into Gaza to avoid a sort of political catastrophe in the form of famine, but to leave people perpetually hungry. Now, we're seeing that situation since October, but dramatically amplified. Very little humanitarian assistance entering into Gaza. The hospitals that we were working in had very limited access to basic medical equipment. If you imagine going to an A&E department in London, you have everything at your disposal. We were having to reuse surgical scalpels. There were occasions where I had a child bleeding out on the floor and I couldn't find sterile gauze to pack the wound. We ran out of IV cannulas to start giving people IV fluids and blood. I mean, the most basic medical equipment. So to your question, James, what can you achieve? As I say, very, very little. And this is why the answer, of course, is not humanitarian access on its own. The letter states very, very clearly that we need an end to the violence and at the same time a surge of medical and humanitarian support to meet those immediate needs. One can't, that humanitarian access will be completely ineffectual if the violence isn't brought to an immediate end.
That's brutal, and that's why I asked the question. And you've answered my next question, actually, which was about what else you were calling for beyond the cessation of military, economic and diplomatic support. You've written to Keir Starmer and David Lammy, and you state at the end of your letter, we are not politicians. We are simply medical professionals who feel duty-bound to speak out about what we saw in Gaza. Our duty is to our patients, to our fellow healthcare workers still in Gaza, and to humanity. It is the same principle of duty many of us apply to our day-to-day work in the NHS, as we did in Gaza as well. How optimistic are you that you will achieve more with this plea than previous pleas to these people and previous politicians to do some of the things that you're calling for?
I think we have to do absolutely everything at our disposal, and we need to escalate our strategies of political advocacy and political mobilization across civil society. So that work needs to continue, despite what I'm about to say, which is that this particular letter, I am not convinced will have a major impact. For some time now, the UK government has finally acknowledged that they will and have called for a ceasefire, but they have not taken serious action to see that through, or to press, to apply political and diplomatic pressure. It's one thing making, frankly, empty calls for a ceasefire. It's another thing entirely applying political leverage and diplomatic leverage to bring about an end to the violence. We we know that there are many ways in which the UK government is directly complicit in what's happening, providing military support to Israel's military activities, assisting with surveillance and so on. And of course, several governments providing other forms of military support. So the most perverse example is the US military, which has for a long time, or the US state, which for a long time has been the primary political and financial supporter of Israel. On the one hand, calling for an end to the violence or speaking to how horrific it is, and on the other, breaking records in terms of the amount of military assistance that it's providing to Israel.
Doesn't get any easier. We're going to run out of time, James. I'm sorry. So it doesn't get any easier to process that dichotomy the more one hears it. But thank you for your time today. I'm already leaching slightly into Sheila Fogarty's programme. So Dr. James Smith there, emergency doctor who's volunteered two assignments, as it were, in Gaza, and one of the signatories to this open letter that has been sent to Keir Starmer, and David Lammy, both describing what they have witnessed and endured and experienced in Gaza and calling for measures that would lead to a cessation of these horrors. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as all of Global's live radio stations. So download Global Player for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, Ben Kentish in for Tom Swarbrick, but now it's Sheila Fogarty. 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 Swarbrick, but now it's Sheila